So good morning. Hopefully I'm starting this on the dot. This is my July 4th stream that is probably going to be pretty laid back, but I wanted to do something for the event, and I decided this would be a good enough time to take a look at BreadTube. Looks like I've got an echo. Stream that is probably going to be pretty laid back, but give me a second, guys. Okay, sorry about that. So yes, hopefully everyone's hearing in the chat and we can keep on going. I did put out an invite to some of the people so just to give some background, I did want to go through a number of BreadTube videos. So for those who are somewhat familiar with my internet consumption habits, every time I see a political channel, I more or less just hit subscribe to it with very few exceptions. Oh, so the audio sounds off. This is a new setup. Okay. Is anyone else? I think maybe this is going to correct itself if people are hearing the echoing. But at any rate, let's just see if this corrects itself. But anyway, people who are interested in my internet consumption habits, every time I see a political YouTube channel, I basically just subscribe to it. And so is the mic acting up actually, or is this just the echo coming in a second time? Okay, well, let's just let this... Okay, so it did settle. That's what I thought. Okay, excellent. So, not to belabor the point too much. So not to belabor the point too much, but I usually subscribe to most political YouTube channels that I see that discuss ideas. And I've noticed that really there hasn't been very much reactionary content coming out, but there have been an enormous number of videos from LeftTube. Now, I shouldn't say there's been no reactionary content. Obviously, people like Morgoth's Review and Endeavor, which are probably, I think those channels are to the right of mine, but I think they're really, really good. So you guys should all subscribe to Morgoth and Endeavor. I actually think they have a very similar perspective to each other, albeit from different countries. And you know, it's somewhat similar to mine, although a little bit more right wing. But absolutely subscribe to Endeavor and Morgoth. But with the exception of those two, I haven't seen any real right wing content. And in the meantime, my subscription page has been flooded with people from BreadTube or LeftTube. So I want to take this time to kind of go over some of those videos, answer questions, just do a general live stream. People who've kind of been following me on Twitter know that I have been moving again this last week or two, which means that I just got internet. I just got my system set up here in my new place. But of course, because I'm moving all the time when I'm not at work, I don't have very much time to do recordings or produce content. So that's kind of probably put a damper on what would have ordinarily been more moderate output. I have a B-side that I think I might release in a few days. That's kind of, it's like a longish video that was a little less pointed than my usual videos, and I might as well just publish it. And I'm also trying to get out the video on democracy, which I had to postpone recording for a while. So yeah, that's the content as it's looking, the content outlook as we're facing forward into the next week or two. So I did invite people from BreadTube, and we'll see if they show up. This is kind of weird. It's always weird doing this stuff in the morning. I'm never quite as energized as I am during evening streams. But because I've been so busy, I just haven't had time to do evening streams. But I think that will change. I think I'll be able to get some of my videos out that I've been planning. I know I've been promising a lot and haven't been delivering quite as much as I said. I want to make sure that there's a continuous stream of content on this channel, regardless if it has to be live streams because of my schedule. Sometimes it just feels, when you're in the situation I am, you kind of have you kind of have two different lives and you feel like you're slackers in each one. It never feels like you're spending enough time in any one of your projects, but then you realize that, really you're using all of your time for one of these three objectives, and it's kind of an impossible task to juggle all three of them. Okay, well, yeah, I see some congratulations. So yeah, hopefully, maybe I'll do a stream one day where we just have it in the garden. The garden's really nice. I think that I'm actually kind of, I shouldn't say I'm proud of it, but I really, really, really like the garden. And it was, I think the person who lived here was a Buddhist or something, because it's sort of an Asian theme. With, like with the Japanese stone lanterns and bamboo, a small bamboo grove. And we're thinking of converting some of the little grotto areas to Marianne Grotto. So we'll see if that work. Well, I mean, it obviously work. I used by a statue, but maybe it would be interesting content to put on Catholic Wench's channel. She could do we could do a gardening series on her channel, and I don't know. That's definitely not something for this channel, at any rate. Yeah, I know Ray's blowing up my mentions. I just, I'm always at she always has these big sort of Twitter explosions when I'm in the middle of work. So every time I go off for water or, coffee, I check my Twitter mentions and I just see there's 30 mentions from Ray Murasami, and she's really, really angry, and I have no idea what she's angry at, and it's just too much effort to go through these threads and figure out. I mean, she's obviously really upset about something, but I have no idea what it is, and I just can't. I don't have the bandwidth to figure it out. And the problem with Ray Murasami is I have been really itching to get into conversation with people on LeftTube. But I don't really feel that Ray Murasami is properly described as on the left. She's an accidental reactionary. She has ethno-nationalist tendencies, leanings, and sympathies, as long as the ethno-nationality is Asian and not Caucasian under any condition. They have an incredibly cynical and non-care-oriented ethics, if you're going to use the Jonathan Haidt method of categorizing people. And Ray's politics is super aggressive. They're basically a third worldist reactionary. And I wish that, they're a third worldist reactionary that doesn't like Westerners. And this is sort of the problem. This is sort of why the left has been so dominant in international politics, is that third world nationalists and Westerners have been at each other's throats, and we need to heal these divisions. Maybe they can never be healed. But I don't think that, I think that as long as there's division, as long as there's not a unified understanding of reaction and right wing across different nations, then we're going to have a hard time really becoming something that's internationally respected the way that a lot of these radical left-wing movements are. There should be international forces inside the politics of the right, and not just a number of fighting nationalist forces. And this is something that's just, we've never quite mastered how to deal with this problem. Okay, so just on my list, if people want to DM me questions, or I'm going to answer them now so people can trickle in. I'll just go over the stuff that I have queued. I have a lot of thoughts on videos. I have the violinist argument by the Liberal Sanity Project, which is certainly one of my least favorite YouTubers and people, but I think that it's good to address. I was going to do a video response to Philosophy Tube's little violinist argument, but that just went on the stack, right? I can only do a video at a time. So everything is going to kind of get gated behind the democracy one, which is the next one, obviously. That's not live streams. Obviously, live streams don't take any time to produce. What you see is what you get. With the exception of the amount of time it takes for me to make my coffee and set up the OBS, which is 20 minutes. Because I'm a boomer. Yes, you got it. I still don't see... let's just... My browser's not doing too great here. I don't see any questions. Oh, gardening content, please, if it's only just on Twitter. Yeah, I think we should. Well, I'll discuss this with Catholic Wench. I think she's playing Heroes of Might and Magic right now. If you might hear that in the background, it was soft enough so it won't really interfere with the live stream. But I think that we were originally we had discussed using Catholic Wench's channel as sort of like the Distributists After Hours, where we like played video games together and did gardening and stuff like that, which would kind of be cool. But the problem is that I feel that I think that, people are kind of, it's not always relaxing when the camera turns on. And so if we're both exhausted after a day of work, and Catholic Wench works very hard, I'm not going to go, obviously there are circumstances that certain people are aware of. And it's going to be hard to like, oh, well, we just went through a day of work. Let's turn on the camera. Am I looking right? Am I self-conscious? That will be hard. But I think if we do it right, then maybe we could not use faces all the time. I think we could do some video game / gardening content on her channel. Of course, I'd have to see what she says about the gardening stuff. I think it would be fun. I think learning how to do gardening and then doing some tutorials on that would be interesting. I was planning on 2 hours for this stream because I'm the distributist and brevity isn't really my thing, dude. Extra credit videos stop normalizing Nazis. Okay, so Charlemagne says, did you see the recent extra credit video stop normalizing the Nazis? No, I haven't. I don't subscribe to extra credits. Is it something that needs a response? Is it something we agree with? Perhaps they're saying that we overuse the label Nazi. I just think that's not exactly a hot take at this era. But we'll see. Man, not seeing very many questions. Are we going to start the videos so soon? It'll be interesting. Brave is not doing too well. It seems like it's really kind of struggling to do all of these open windows. I'm a very diehard Brave user. It's a company that cares about your privacy. And it's also run by a TradCon, Brendan Eich, the guy who got fired from Mozilla. Now, I looked at his staff, and his staff is like, because they're in San Francisco, it's like 100% social justice warriors. They don't have an engineer that doesn't have colored hair. But still, nevertheless, I think that because it's tightly owned, at least at this stage, Brave will be a force for free speech and privacy in the present era. So I 100% support them. Why are the leftists unbearable to listen to exactly? I guess I don't understand. Wait, is the audio unbalanced again? Okay, if there's an audio problem, then you guys have to tell me. But I have people telling me it's fine. I just reset up this microphone, so I wouldn't be surprised if the audio was off. But again, I can't hear myself, so you guys are going to have to tell me. You can put the questions here, please. I have Twitter up, but it's, I don't know. I'll check it periodically, I guess. I invited Faraday Speaks on. I invited Non-Compete on. I invited Thought Slime on. I think the probability of any BreadTuber coming in is going to be fairly low. I guess I could have some other people from my Discord server on if they wanted to come on and discuss these videos a little bit later. I was hoping to get through one video individually and answer some individually directed questions before we got to that point. And all of my projects with the Cana Society have been kind of frozen a little bit because of the fact that I've been moving. What's your opinion of Boris Johnson? He's basically like British Trump, but I don't know. His political career of switching back and forth between left and right makes me believe that he's and I don't mean like hard left, but he just seems like he's an offensive guy that pisses the left off, and that's why people like him. But he's not going to accomplish anything political. What's your opinion of Charles Coulomb and Tumblr House? I really like it. I mean, okay, so Charles Coulomb is thoroughly from the stodgy Catholic sphere. He's he's the energy of most boomer priests, but he's got some genuinely interesting ideas, and I like the fact that he's so honest in his takes on all of these things, and I really hope to see his channel grow. Okay, Owen Benjamin. Well, what about Owen Benjamin? I don't know. I mean, has he done something recently? Oh, and by the way, I can't see questions that aren't added at me, but I saw someone say, "Have you read Flann O'Brien?" I absolutely have read Flann O'Brien. I I love The Third Policeman. I plan to read that to my wife. It's a little bit abstract. I got halfway through at Swim Two Birds. That didn't really grab me as hard, but I've been told that it's better. And I really want to get into that a little bit more. I'm a huge fan of Irish literature of the early 20th century. I'm a huge William Butler Yeats fan. Some part of me believes that the energy that's embodied in the early 20th century reemergence of certain elements of surrealism and futurism and romanticism are part of the energy that's going to have to be rediscovered for a new artistic movement of right-wingers in the 21st century. But this is something that, again, it's a little bit above my pay grade. But I would encourage anyone who's interested in sort of new perspectives to sort of rediscover some of these artists from the early 20th century. They're really worth it. Suggestions for a generic Protestant that hasn't gone deep into theology on the simplest way to get into Catholicism. Well, that's a good point. I am caught totally flat-footed on that question. I guess it's in terms of books. I guess the first thing, are you convinced that Christianity is an apostolic religion? And if you're not, that's sort of the first basic question. I do know that there's a variety of Catholic apologetics, particularly from places like Catholic Answers or authors that appear there. I don't have one off the top of my head. It's actually not a question I get a lot. Because the arguments kind of tend to be, that take you from Protestantism to Catholicism, are a little bit dry. Okay, so the audio is messed up. Is that a consensus? Because I can switch my microphone really quickly, but it's going to take me offline for about 5 minutes. Maybe I should do this now. Well, I guess we'll take. Well, let's wait a little bit. I'll answer some more questions and see if people are agreeing about this. What was the Catholic response to Machiavelli and his ideas? Well, this is the problem, Morgoth. I'm like the last. So Morgoth asked me, what was the Catholic's response to Machiavelli and his ideas? Well, this is the problem. It's I don't. You're asking the absolute wrong person. Because I sort of firmly believe that well, so get this. I think that there's two great Florentines political theorists in history. The first one's obviously Dante, who's known for. Okay, so people can hear me fine. Okay, so that's fine. I don't want to take this offline. If it's a little bit of a problem, I'll just correct it for next stream. Okay, so the right ear is much louder. Well, maybe this is an OBS thing. Testing. Oh yeah, it does look like the right ear is much louder. Well, how do I fix that? Testing. Oh, I don't know. It doesn't look like it's easily correcting itself. So aside from resetting up my microphone, which is probably not a good idea, let's just see if we can fix this the next time we go on stream. It doesn't look like it's a big problem. And I can see it on my thing. It must be some problem with the microphone itself. The balance looked like that. Maybe I can switch the settings here. Let's see if that works. Okay, does that work? Maybe that's a little bit better. And but okay, let's just answer Morgoth's question. So Morgoth had an excellent question, and I think this is sort of what I like about Morgoth, and I think Endeavor kind of as a person who gives kind of very good answers and very straightforward answers. But what I like about Morgoth's channel is I think he asks the right questions, and he just came out with a really good question right now, which is what is the problem with Machiavelli and the Catholic Church? I think Machiavelli is a foundational speaker, a foundational thinker for the right. Now, I'm of the opinion that so to back up a little bit, there were two sort of foundational political thinkers from Florence. Obviously, one much earlier than the other. There was Dante, who was, I would say, he was one of the greatest medieval thinkers. He was a person who wrote in the High Middle Ages. He was, okay, I know he was technically a Guelph, which, so in medieval politics, in medieval trans-European politics, there were kind of two branches. The first one was the branch called the Guelphs, which was people who wanted power to conglomerate behind France and implicitly the Pope. And then there were the Ghibellines, who wanted power to be conglomerated behind the Holy Roman Empire, which is what was really Western Germany, but we would perceive the Holy Roman Empire as Germany. Okay. So, at any rate, so Dante was a white Guelph, basically a moderate Guelph, and he had huge Ghibelline sympathies. And his large political project was to sort of try to, not to borrow a concept of Hegel, but to kind of politically unify what he saw was a war between the secular mission of Rome, aka Western civilization, aka the secular, it's Guelph, yeah. Well, no, but he was technically a Guelph. But the white Guelphs were exiled by the more extreme version of the Guelphs, right? And so when the white Guelphs were exiled from Florence, they went into hiding with the Ghibellines, who were on the outs from Florentinian politics. And this is why Dante was sort of very concerned with the unification of these views. And the specific unification of the views that Dante was interested in was a sort of merging between the hard religious mission that was at that time embodied in chivalric Christendom, aka France, and then sort of the more secular nation-state oriented Holy Roman Empire, which saw itself as the continuation of Europe's secular and non-Christian, and not really non-Christian, but basically cultural and cultural identity that existed prior to Christianity, aka Rome. And Dante was of the opinion that these two powers were both needed, and both needed to be kept in reign. He said that Christ gave a dual mandate, that in some sense Rome or Western civilization was sort of blessed to continue on as a separate project from the secular chivalric force that was also supposed to be reign in Christendom. Now, this brings us to one of the most interesting political dynamics ever, because if we fast forward 200 years in the same city, and the politics changed a lot, because we essentially hop right out of the Middle Ages into the late Renaissance / early Reformation with Machiavelli, which I think he lived a little bit before the Reformation. It was about the same time, because he talked about Catherine de' Medici, right? Now I'm kind of, it was basically, but it's a big distinction, right? 200 years basically gets you out of the Middle Ages and into the era of Reformation. And Machiavelli was dealing with other corruption, specifically coming from ruling families and entrenched powers. And Machiavelli's purpose was not to say create some ideal version of Christendom that kept secular power and religious persuasion in tow. His mission was to create a description of how political power actually worked scientifically. Now, this was sort of hopped on by a lot of Catholic thinkers who were coming on to basically a lot of Catholic thinkers at the time thought that this was horribly immoral, that we can't separate politics from ethics. We can't study it this way because of the fact that Thomas Aquinas and Aristotle both had their political conception and their ethical conception unified. And very, very strong thinkers have brought this criticism against Dante. Some of them even right-wing thinkers. Very classically, Frederick the Great of Prussia wrote a book called The Anti-Machiavelli, which was a book that laid out his vision of cameralism, the vision where the monarch is the advocate for the people and sort of rules in lieu of them. And Frederick the Great's idea, which was very much in the vein of chivalric knighthood, of the very kind that the Guelphs supported in Dante's time, he was very much of the idea that the king was the knight of the people. He ruled for them. And everything was honor-based. And to have the Machiavellian notion of politics come in it would poison the trust people had for the monarchs. They would start thinking, okay, what are they? They would start thinking in Machiavellian terms, right? And I am of the opinion that that we are seeing play out a little bit of the same battle that went on in Florence during Dante's time. We have a secular notion of politics that extends from Machiavelli, and we have the religious notion of chivalry and proper kingship and holiness that extends from the church and was prefigured in people like Aristotle before Jesus. Just like the Guelphs and the Ghibellines, I feel like these two warring factions inside the Western soul have to be brought to some kind of synthesis going forward. That the mission of modern right-wingers is to figure out how to keep these two horses in rein. The same way that Dante thought that Rome and Christianity were two forces that had to rule Europe separately, but also be kept in rein together. And I hear half of the people in this chat despise Machiavelli, half of them despise Frederick the Great. Okay, I know. Look, I'm not saying I understand that Prussia had its problems. And, being from Southern German extraction, I don't love the fact that Prussian culture basically dominated over Southern German culture for most of the 18th and 19th centuries. But what we're talking about is ideas here. We're talking about ideas here, not like the politics of bygone countries that haven't existed in 200 years. What did you say to Nick Fuentes to make him hate you so much? Why does Nick Fuentes hate me so much? I have literally never said, that I'm aware of, I've literally said nothing to Nick Fuentes. Maybe we got into some like Twitter arguments or something like that. I don't like his optical perspective. I'll say that. I mean, I think it's kind of gauche. Sorry, pardon me. It's a little bit gauche for my taste. But I'm not trying to be like I'm not trying. To be quite honest, I have no desire to police other right wingers' perspective. there's probably very few people who like the kind of like bookish, overly verbose stuff I do, and also like Nick Fuentes. But you know, I don't think everyone should like this overly contemplative perspective that I bring. If I only listen to I think sometimes I'm a little bit tiresome. I would imagine most people think that I talk in a pretentious way, and that's just how I talk. But you know, sometimes maybe you want someone who's a little bit more, in the trenches and straight talker. I also think that Nick. I also think he does stir up. I think he also does stir up conflict on Twitter, just to kind of get a rise. I say a question: what are your top 5 favorite YouTube channels? Well, right now, I would say Endeavor and Morgoth's Review are. The problem is like top 5 of all time. I would say like 1791, Morgoth's Review, and Endeavor, and those are the ones that I see publishing content on the right. Maybe am I forgetting something? I would say on the sort of the girl side, critical condition and Blonde in the Belly of the Beast produce pretty high quality content that I've been impressed with. It's very qualitatively different than I would say the other right-wing channels, but I think that I do think in some sense it's right for girl right-wingers to be like a separate product and a separate thing than male right-wingers, and I think that's naturally going to happen. But we'll see what happens. And 1791 is a normie conservative. It's 1791, right? That's it. That's the one I'm thinking of. Yeah, they're normie conservatives for sure. But they're really good normie conservatives. They're the good kind. They're the kind that's honest about the presuppositions they're making. They're the kind that are going to be. I think they're going to be reforming Buckleyism going forward in a more productive way. They understand that reform needs to happen. So I really like them. Edward Dutton. So Edward Dutton is a colleague of the person I interviewed called Michael Woodsley. They have a good academic record, despite the fact that the left tries to trash it constantly and present them as charlatans. They're mainly about human biodiversity, and I think that I'm thinking of the right guy, the jolly heretic Edward Dutton. I think sometimes he comes off as a little bit spastic, but overall, I think he has good points. I haven't read all of the papers, but it seems to me that that they're doing good science. I mentioned this to other bread tubers. If you want me to not believe Edward Dutton and Michael Woodsley when I read their papers, then give me an equivalent refutation of what they're saying. Because I know enough statistics to know that this looks pretty valid. And the refutations that I'm hearing from the left tube, like more variation within than between and all this stuff, doesn't make... That's statistical nonsense. I don't know anything about biology, but I know enough about statistics to know that more variation within than in between is bullshit. I mean, it's more variation within than in between is a legitimate argument for why you shouldn't be a bigot, but it's not a legitimate argument for why there aren't why populations couldn't have qualitatively or quantitatively different reactions to things. I don't know. Lindsay Shepherd is practically reactionary. I heard her on Critical Conditions channel. I think everyone's going to be. I think that everyone is either a reactionary or is going to be drawn into a reactionary type of thinking. I think this is just the necessary way we go about doing this. I think this is just the natural reaction to most of these things. So maybe we should do a video. Strangely enough, I haven't seen a single super chat. Am I demonetized? Is the super chat even an option? I mean, not that I like really need money, but this is kind of funny that like, you know, maybe people are just poor. Maybe people have just exhausted their ability to give. Okay, on the left, I will say I have been enjoying watching a lot of the bread tubers because they're just so stupid. and ContraPoints, and I'll do a video on this more or less whenever I can. They just effectively released a refutation to transgenderism as it exists outside of a psychological phenomenon. And do they realize that? So, okay, I just see a super chat. Thomas Jockton for $2 says, nope, it works. Okay. Well, thanks a lot for your contribution, man. I hope that this is entertaining enough to justify the $2. Patrick for $2, super chat. Well, okay, thanks, guys. Yeah, this will be a longer one. Okay, you guys can stop testing it now. I'll have to answer some more questions just to justify that outlay of finances. Let's get to some videos. Okay, so does people have any preferences to what a leftist? We could go through the Liberal Sanity Project one, For My Sins. The Thought Slime videos are really stupid. Really stupid. I think that so I should say the super chatters who were so kind to chest out my super chat system were Thomas Jockton for $2, Patrick for $2, and Bob Frankley for $2, and now Cameron Grimm for $2, who calls me a queer to boot. Okay, great. So Justine Brown says, I met Ed Dutton at a conference a few years ago. He's great. Yeah, I just, you know, he comes off as good to me in his literature. Maybe there's someone who's just thoroughly debunked him in an academic sense. Okay, so we have Noel and Noel for $2 with a smiley face. Well, thank you very much. Oh, I have to do one Thought Slime video. Do you want all cops are bad? We can go through that one. Do the biggest and gayest one. Take out the alpha. Well, is the extra credit video something? Okay, well, we can look at the extra credit video. What was the extra credits video on again that people wanted me to look at? Stop normalizing Nazis. Is this it? Okay, maybe we should start with this one. Okay.
There you are.
Okay, let's see.
Playing the PvP in your World War II shooter, and all of the...
Is that too loud or too soft? Okay, I'm just going to assume... I'm going to turn the volume down a little bit, and we'll go forward with this volume, and let's reset it, okay?
There you are, playing the PvP in your World War II shooter, and all of a sudden, you're a Nazi. You didn't ask for this. You didn't choose this. Yet there it is. And it's treated no differently than playing a British soldier.
Wait, this is a joke, right? Wait. Okay, is Extra Credits like a joke channel or something? I mean, okay, well, let's just go. I see the chat. I feel like my IQ just dropped a few points with that one sentence.
This is bad on so many levels. No one should ever have a random chance of fighting for the Nazis. And we...
Like I have video games where you can like literally be a demon and like destroy the world and be a criminal mass murderer. Like, but not a historical side in the Civil War. And does this extend to all sides that we consider to be bad? Like, should we not be able to play Genghis Khan or I mean, the Confederates? Okay, let's keep on going.
We should never express that there's no meaningful difference between Nazis and Allied soldiers, or that they're functionally interchangeable. And before anyone equivocates and says not all German soldiers in World War II were Nazis,
Yeah, I will say that, dude. Because I had a grandfather that fought for Germany during World War II, and they weren't members of the Nazi Party. Thank you very much.
if they were wearing the swastika and are functioning as an arm of the Nazi government, then unless the game goes out of its way to tell you specifically that your particular character is not a Nazi, then they're a Nazi.
What the? What the? What the? I mean, do people understand that armies, especially armies during the early 20th century, were largely conscripted? I mean, these were not political forces. I mean, people were fighting for this is the whole reason why it's so important to honor the war dead, even honoring the war dead on the sides that lost, because most people who fight in wars perform heroism to save the people who are fighting next to them. They're not involved in politics. They don't know the politics. Someone's just handed them a gun and they're going to fight against an invading army that's come into their country. But now we're acting like every single person inside of a given army is necessarily a partisan. Now, probably, I imagine, and I'm going to anticipate one of his responses, I do believe that the SS was mostly comprised of partisan fighters that were ideologically drawn to the Nazi Party. I think they might have had to been Nazi parties, but the Wehrmacht was just conscripts mostly. And well, I don't. I'm not going to anticipate what this guy says, but this is hilarious. And I see super chats are finally coming in, but let's keep on going. This is to quote Tucker Carlson. This is a little bit wacky. It's a little bit wacky here.
In that multiplayer shooter, when it switched you to the German side, did it go out of its way to tell you that the person you're playing was pressed into service under threat of their life?
No. Should it? It should play a little caption showing you how your soldier was conscripted. That sounds great.
Yeah, that's a big old nope. Oh, and on a similar note, let's please stop forcing people to play as terrorists as well. There you are, playing your modern shooter, and all of a sudden you're a terrorist. You...
What? Okay, this has to be a joke. So now it's not only just Nazis, it's also terrorists. I mean, the American military is responsible for numerous atrocities. It's killed more people than Al-Qaeda has. Not that I think that makes Al-Qaeda legitimate. I don't think that the legitimacy of political entities extends directly from their not having committed atrocities. And this kind of, again, this kind of brings me into more of a pre-Enlightenment framework of understanding political power. But the Allies, especially the Soviet Union, but also Britain and America, were imperialists. They committed numerous atrocities, both against Allied civilian populations and against subjugated imperial populations before and after the war. But no, the terrorists. So we can't play terrorists of a reactionary nature. I guess they mean Islamist terrorists. I mean, do terrorists count as the Viet Cong? So you can't play the Viet Cong. Does that mean that we have to endorse the French or American occupation of Vietnam? Or, I mean, I don't know. These battles over colonial occupation between France, America, the Viet Cong, the Catholic Vietnamese that ruled in South Vietnam, and all of these things, these are historically complicated events. And, you know, if I had my druthers, obviously, I would probably choose nativist Catholic rulers in Vietnam. But the problem is that you can't. There aren't any good guys in complicated historical battles if we're treating history as any kind of non-cartoon thing. I mean, I feel like have our minds been so colonized by Indiana Jones that the history itself has become a political cartoon?
You didn't ask for this, you didn't choose this, and yet, second verse, same as the first. There it is. I mean, that's literally the name of your side in the game. We can do better than this.
We can have a game about shooting people that doesn't involve bad people that shoot people.
Even if you put aside all of the people who have had traumatic experiences with these groups, who have lost loved ones to terrorists, or who have had generations of their families wiped out by Nazis, no one should have to put on the costume of an ideology they find abhorrent without actually opting into it in your game. And by making people do so, we get them to stop thinking about it, to stop thinking of the meaning behind these things. We normalize them.
Oh my god, this is so stupid. Like, oh god, this is so stupid. I don't even know what to respond to this. So any historical bad person, playing them in a game normalizes them. So basically, no historical games, period.
Make them just window dressing for entertainment. Those uniforms, those symbols, become things that no longer inherently revolt us.
I don't think that the uniforms or the Iron Cross should inherently revolt us. They were things that existed before the Nazi Party. I think the swastika is the one exclusively Nazi symbol that was ideological in origin. The other ones were more or less just German symbols that were inherited from the Second Reich. And to kind of link this back to a discussion on Prussia before, they were inherited from the Prussian government, probably going back more or less to Frederick. Yeah. Okay, Iron Cross. I really don't have a problem with the Iron Cross. As a matter of fact, I seem to remember that snowboarders used to put the Iron Cross and the Rising Sun on their snowboards. I don't know. I mean, look, anything can be, you can do this with anything.
They reduce our visceral reaction to seeing the embodiment of these ideologies. Now, does this make us totally ignore the history that comes with them? No. But for some people, it moves them from the territory of revolting to just edgy. It makes scrawling a swastika on something change from unthinkable to just dangerous. It means you might not take iron crosses all over a website as a warning sign that you should immediately leave, and if you don't leave, you might start reading and buying into hateful ideas there.
Ah, I see. Now the story becomes clear. So this idiotic idea is the mainstream panicking over far-right radicalization. They are terrified of the alt-right's ability to manipulate culture. And the alt-right's dead. The movement's totally dead. But these guys are absolutely terrified of what they saw in late 2016, early 2017, and they're trying to erect a new set of standards against any symbols that have Nazi. I mean, the question is like any. The problem is that while we've become more sensitive to the Nazi stuff, everything involving Stalin and communists has become normalized to the point where we literally have Leninists going around, people who are trying to minimize the crimes of the Soviet Union and the mass murders under socialist regimes. I just don't know. I mean, other than completely transforming our culture into an apparatus of progressive propaganda, there's really going to be no end to this.
It seems like such a small and simple thing, but it's things like this that erode our safeguards against dangers we sacrifice so much to fight.
I don't know. I mean, it really wasn't until the whole big late Obama collapse that all of these radical right-wing forces came back in. We had Nazis appear in popular culture for decades. And since video games have been around, Nazis have been a feature on them. You didn't see the rise in the alt-right or neo-reaction until 2012, if we're being honest. A few blogs like Mencius Molebugs probably notwithstanding, but those were fringe. The thing is, it's so obvious that the force driving the radicalization is the left in our culture. Basically, the right wing radicalization, as much as I dislike this, is an equal and opposite reaction. It's properly named as a reactionary force. I mean, not just because we're talking about pre-Enlightenment ideas that were called reactionary during the French Revolution, but also because it happened as a response to radicalization from the left. That's what's driving it, not Wolfenstein.
By the time you've played 100 hours of being a Nazi, their voice stabs become memes and in-jokes with your friends. By the 1,000th time you've respawned as a terrorist, you're either celebrating them or making fun of them. Neither of which helps the global crisis we have that takes thousands of lives every year.
So people are joining ISIS because of video games.
So what do? That's easy. Don't make them morally equivalent. Don't make there be no in-game moral difference between your Nazis and your allies, between your terrorists and your counter-terrorist squads. Frame PvP as a training exercise, or simply take one of your non-odious sides and recolor them so that it's red versus blue, rather than Axis versus allies.
Oh, good lord. So basically, sanitize your game out of any historical context. Turn it into paintball. I mean, even this little cartoon character with the goatee, I feel like I know who this guy is, and I just want to punch him in the face. Like, I shouldn't say that. I shouldn't say violence, but you understand this guy has spent 5 minutes thinking about this, hasn't thought of any of his previous experiences, and now he's talking about how we need to renormalize all of these things. And I really doubt that he wants to essentially ban hammer and sickles. I don't think he wants to stigmatize communists. I'm just venturing a guess here that this is only going to be pertaining to right-wing forms of radicalism. I don't know, just a guess.
A good example of a game that does this is Rainbow Six Siege. All of your bomb diffusion and hostage rescue multiplayer with no normalizing terrorists. In fact, by having all of the characters as counter-terrorists training for a possible threat, it highlights how real and present of a threat that is. And if you decide that you need to have both sides be playable, don't make them interchangeable. Don't have
Okay.
players randomly spawn in as one or the other. Allow players to choose which side they're on.
Okay, but then you choose to be a Nazi? Like, the game can only commence if half the people choose Axis, right? So then are people going to come back and say, like, oh, you're morally suspect if you choose Axis? Like, then everyone's going to choose allies, and the people who choose Axis are going to be the edgy people who actually get the games going. And so allies are going to be seen as people who are goody two-shoes who do what they're told and prevent games from actually being able to go on, and people who choose Axis as being cool and people who are not put off by arbitrary symbol distinctions in digital warfare. They couldn't be doing a better job of essentially making Nazis cool than doing just this, and then also providing an unenforceable stigma against choosing Axis.
Now, of course, this has all sorts of in-game problems, such as creating shorter wait times for fascists, but you know what? Those wait times could be artificially extended if it meant players had an active choice in what teams they would represent if you're saying we need people playing Nazis in our games. And if you're going to say, but we need it for historical reasons, then your game better actually be historical. You can't really just hide behind the fact you called your desert map El Alamein and say, but it's historical. If that were the case, you need your PvP to at least represent real historical events and be a realistic take on those battles. Once you make both sides balanced, it's also no longer historical. And you can't really say that you need Nazis anymore for historical accuracy.
This is so stupid. I mean, I don't know. I've already said, let's just let this video run out.
Oh, and once you let players get cool weapons that weren't actually at that particular battleground, it's also no longer historically accurate. And you can't declare that your game will suffer if you don't put players in the jackboots of the Third Reich. And once your map is something carefully designed to have good gameplay by a team in a room in San Francisco or LA, and it's not a faithful reconstruction of the actual places the historical events occurred in, You can no longer say we need to have players take up arms in service of terror or hate. And look, we're not saying we can't have games about World War II or about terrorism.
Yes, you are. You are saying that. You're saying that it has to be a complete historical simulation or it has to be a game. It can't be a game and have any qualities of historical simulation. Why? Like, if you make it fun, like World War II wasn't fun. Counterterrorism isn't fun. So you create a historical simulation. There's a game about World War One a while ago that was like, and I was like, everyone was like raving about this game. I can't remember what it was called, but I'm like, and I didn't want to. I kind of like the idea that we were getting away from World War II was the only war in history. But at the same time, I'm so conscious of how terrible World War One was that some part of me could never see it and think like, oh yeah, I'm having fun being a soldier in World War One. In some sense, I kind of, you know, maybe I'm making the point of this video, but and this was really after my time playing AAA video games to begin with. But it was so conscious in my mind that this was not a fun experience that I never felt like I wanted to play that game. But if you made an accurate simulation of World War One, no one would play that game. It would be sitting around in mud, waiting to go over the top and get shot by machine guns, and then get whistled back for a retreat 90% of the time before you actually engaged with the enemy. You know, like that would be a World War One simulator of the Battle of the Somme most of the time. And it would be terrible and it would not be fun. Saying that you have to make everything a historically accurate rendition of these events means that they can't be games in any sense of the way we understand games.
We're not even saying we shouldn't make games where you play as a Nazi or a terrorist. But what we are saying is that the fact that you're playing as a Nazi or a terrorist in a game has to mean something.
No, you just said that you can't have any, in order to properly claim that you have fun, in order to properly claim that you are representing history, you can't engineer the game to be fun outside of what was there historically. So that does mean that you can't really have games that aren't just historical simulators. Or you're saying that if they're games, I guess this is a caveat now, they're saying that if they're games, they have to literally be propaganda pieces. I imagine that's what they're going to say.
And it can't just be a skin. It can't be something that a game randomly drops you into. And really, if we are saying anything in this episode, it's this. Games can do better. And in this particular case,
if there's one thing, I wish I could destroy this from the lexicon. Like, do better. Like, you can do better. That's not an idea. That's not an idea. That's just. I don't want to sound like a misogynistic, but that's like that's a very passive aggressive, like female type complaint. I mean, women should always criticize their husbands for not doing things as well as they could. It's part of the role of being a woman, of being an effective woman, is to ensure that your husband becomes more holy and so on and so forth. But a lot of this necessary female instinct to improve their husbands oftentimes gets put into a passive aggressive mode where you just sit back and go like, oh, do better, do better, do better, with no understanding of the constraints or the trade-offs or really anything that goes into trying to do better, and no recognition of that. And I feel like this kind of perspective, this passive aggression has it's spread to criticism, which is, it's a ridiculous, not anti-intellectual idea. It's passive aggressive, and we're hearing it here. What they're saying is that games have to be propaganda or they have to be simulators. You can't have Nazis inside games, inside any kind of historical game that is designed to be fun. You can't have Nazis. I mean, yeah, you can't have respawns in World War II games because D-Day, people didn't respawn in D-Day. So, I mean, it's just historical simulations only. That's the actual advice, not do better. Do better is not an idea.
It's not even that hard to do better. And
Yeah, because do better is so vague that, like, do better means do slightly better. Well, games always do that. What you mean is become more ideological. I'm sure games can always do that, but this is this is not. Whatever. I'm going forward with this.
it's no more costly to do better. All it requires is that we in the game industry be cognizant of the world around us and what these symbols we're drawing on mean. That we think as we're building, not just about the game we're working on, but about the world as a whole.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't say that. Like, people who made Wolfenstein were not unaware that the Nazis didn't have like robo suits and castles with vampires in them and stuff like that. They weren't doing this out of unconsciousness. They were thinking, okay, well, we can construct historical fantasy games inside a context of a war that happened. Well, in the 90s, it happened 50 years ago. Now it happens 60 or 70 years ago. They were thinking that we could mix history with games. This principle, basically, they just want propaganda. That's what they're saying. They have no problem with historically inaccurate things as long as they create the right propaganda result. So I don't know. So stupid.
If we can do that, we can take a big step forward for the industry. We can stop helping to normalize Nazis.
Oh my god. Oh my god, that's stupid. I don't think we're gonna beat this just going through LeftTube. Oh. I don't know what to say, guys. Maybe I'll answer super chats. Does anyone actually take this seriously? Okay, I have to actually go to the super. I think everyone super chatted the second I started the video. But let's go do the super chats here. Okay. We'll discuss this after I kind of cleanse my mind by answering actually intelligent questions. Okay, so Libertarian Weeb says, for $2, do a video on Protestantism versus Catholicism. Every time I live stream, people ask me for this video, and I say no, because I did do a video on Protestantism about 2 years ago, and it was highly, highly divisive, with certain Protestant YouTubers getting angry at me for making it. I didn't even publish it. It was unlisted, and it just circulated around and caused all sorts of divisions inside the trad sphere that I didn't like. I didn't like that for about a month. Anytime I logged onto Discord or any public forum, it would just devolve into one-upmanship between different Christian denominations. That's just not my bag, and I think that our challenges right now are hard enough without starting a knife fight between Protestantism versus Catholicism. I want to convince Protestants to become Catholic, but several caveats for that. As you may have realized from a question I answered earlier in the stream, I'm not particularly well suited to do that. I don't have a lot of books. B, and this is something that I'm taking from the Innuendo Studios guide that we did last Distance, there isn't really you don't convince people by doing videos. You convince people by talking to them in private. And the conversation of Protestantism versus Catholicism is really a battle that needs to happen in private. I don't want to debunk Protestantism. I don't want to tear down the pillars of the evangelical church. I want people to slowly and quietly convert in an orderly fashion to what I see as slightly more correct views on Christianity that exist inside apostolic Christianity. And I feel that doing debunkings creates chaos and animosity more than it creates good conversation. And I don't want to destroy people's faiths, because I believe that Protestantism is so much healthier than anything. I mean, it's Christianity. It's just Christianity that's not properly organized, in my opinion. $10 for Dreadnought. Dist, I have to ask you what the point of talking to people like Ray Thought Slime is. Covering videos is fun, but didn't the 20th century prove that talking to Marxists is pointless? They want us dead. Well, Ray Murasamy is not a progressive. Ray Murasamy is a reactionary third worldist. She's under the delusion that she's progressive, but she's not progressive. Not at all. The reason why talking to people like Thought Slime and Faraday Speaks is important is that they have power. And talking to people, engaging with, and they'll deny up and the left will deny up and down that they have power. But anyone who thinks that, the right wing has power online hasn't seen how well funded internet left wing groups are in comparison to the very small reactionary right wing dissident right groups that we have in the present. There's basically two people on the right. There are people who are funded that exist as extensions of organizations like National Review. There is the odd person who's managed to make an independent career for themselves, doing sort of a combination of distant right ideas and normie conservative ideas, like Steve Turley or Hunter Avalon or people like that. And then there are the vast majority of distant right YouTubers, bloggers, and content creators that exist on the margins of society that constantly they either do this as a hobby like I do when they make very, very little money, and they're constantly at risk of being doxxed, although I think I think I've already been doxxed. But I think that I'm not in a risk of having my career destroyed. But or they exist as or they're doing this professionally, in which case they're making so little money that it would be very, very difficult to develop a career around it, at least in the area of the country that I live in. The living cost is way too high here to do anything like that in the areas of the country where I live, aka the West Coast. So that being said, the left has more power. It has more power online. Talking to the left and confronting them in videos exposes the powerful for having no good ideas. Extra Credits has millions of views associated with it. They're a big video game channel. They need to be exposed as being intellectually bankrupt, which I think that video did expose them as being intellectually bankrupt. This is something that we need to do again and again and again. I know it feels like I'm a broken record, but it's never boring to engage with the powerful, because engaging with the powerful exposes them. Engaging with people who are, and I know I'm probably going to do a Liberal Sanity Project video, which means that I'm going to be engaging with somebody who's, in my opinion, not a good faith actor. But in this instance, I think that they are repeating arguments that are pretty common on LeftTube and in left wing generally, so it's worth it. It's never the second you stop engaging with people who are powerful, the second you're not doing politics, and it doesn't matter how stupid ContraPoints is, they are in many ways the face of YouTube that the mainstream is putting forward on CNN and the New York Times. And this means that they're worth engaging with. All right. Speaking of which, I haven't seen any reply back from the left if they want to engage. I'm just going to check Twitter really quickly. No, of course not. The left won't. For this reason, the left won't engage with the right. They don't want to take the risk of being embarrassed. But thank you for a contribution, Dreadnought. I really appreciate it. Link for $5 says, might as well give money for this question. What are your thoughts on collapsism and collapsists like Borisov Boscovich? Also, thought on graph Twitter. Well, I'm going to search that hashtag in a second, because I don't know what graph Twitter is. I think collapse, well, it depends. Like, there's certain specific institutions that just need to be destroyed. like the mainstream media and the Republican Party, they're currently in the process of destroying themselves, but it needs to happen sooner. I don't feel that there's a moral need for me to say that I don't really want the Republican Party to collapse, or that I really don't want I don't really want the mainstream media to collapse. These are just discrete institutions. There are enemies. There are a barrier to entry for distant ideas, and the dialectic in this country needs to change radically to allow for new right wing ideas to come to the fore, and those are the chief barriers. I do think that there's a difference between this and constantly talking about civil war. Like, I'm not going to name names, but certain proprietarian YouTubers do, where they're just like, "Civil war, guys, civil war. We're just predicting civil war is going to happen. Like, stock up. Like, we're going to win, guys. We've got all of the guns. We've got all of the power." That kind of collapsitarianism, I am really against. Because it's imminent. It's not saying that this institution is bad and needs to be abolished and replaced with something else. It's basically just saying that we want chaos, and we're more or less trying to immanentize the eschaton. And to me, that's a lot more. I don't want to say problematic, but I'm going to say problematic. It also you can't constantly quote unquote predict civil war and brag about how you're going to win it. I mean, normies are kind of clueless, but they're not stupid. They understand that you're essentially kind of rooting for violence, and they're going to treat you with suspicion and contempt for essentially wanting to derive power out of chaos, which is, in my mind, sort of a fundamentally not legitimate thing that people who are political actors do. We're agents of order, and we should always be publicly lobbying for a different order to come about. The fact that that chaos might be implicitly brought about by collapsing institutions that need to die is more or less just a byproduct of that. So I think the devil. I think that accelerationism in the sort of Civil War variety is just straight up bad. I think that, or in the terms of the total collapse thing, is that's not good. But if you're talking about if collapsitarianism means something that's more specific, then I think there could be some good things in that idea. I don't know. The devil is in the details. But let's see what I can find out about Graph Twitter. Looking at it for 5 seconds here. Anyone want to clarify in the chat? I'm going to look at the chat. Link is referring to catabolic collapse. I don't know what catabolic means. BreadTube is definitely a propaganda tube for the left, which is why they're not really interested in ideas. They're interested in propaganda, which I think we'll see when we look there. I can't quite figure out what Graph Twitter is. Okay, well, someone can explain this to me in chat. Maybe I can answer it later. Okay, so I'm gonna up my volume for my voice a little bit here. Okay, so let's just decrease the YouTube volume a little bit. Let's answer the rest of the super chats here. Okay, Charlemagne for $5. Extra Credits has always been a serious gaming channel. Keep in mind that they publish this on their main channel, not their side channel. Yeah, I'm kind of aware that Extra Credits is a serious channel, but it's yeah, this video was idiotic. I mean, and we have to. I mean, thank God. Actually, I'm glad they published this. It's great. No one could actually defend this if we were in a conversation. I kind of wonder if it would be really nice if I could get a left winger on here to discuss this. But yeah, this is insane. $5 aged boomer. Anita Sarkeesian is a dumb person's idea of what a smart person sounds like. Extra Credits is a dumb person's idea of what a dumb person sounds like. And thought slime is a smart person's idea of what a dumb person sounds like. This is another thing that I see a lot on LeftTube. Pretending to be dumb is like this is a big like this is somehow like a big thing, and it's kind of funny because I feel a lot of ways that this is something that a lot of people on Fox News or talk radio, they always used to pretend to be these louts that didn't care about intellectual ideas. And then they talk about Saul Alinsky, and they read Saul Alinsky, and it's obvious that they weren't just like these backwater people who never read anything. I really hate people pretending to be dumb, especially on the left. For instance, I think that there's almost so much I can take about people talking like idiots, and there's a lot of advantages about you have. And Richard Wolff, who's like a professor, does this all. He talks like an idiot. And he's sitting up there with a PhD in front of his name, having published multiple papers and multiple books, and he talks like an idiot. Marxism is just about equality. We put it up there. And he talks super slowly, like he's talking to preschoolers. And I can't stand it. The reason why they do this is so they can communicate to people who have 100 IQs and feel non-threatening. But the second reason why they do this is so that when they make a point, the point seems like it's really, really basic, because the implicit point that the left tries to communicate at all times is that the only reason why this idea hasn't been universally adopted is that their opponents are totally speaking in bad faith. And talking like an idiot, like these revelations are obvious, means it communicates implicitly to their audience that everyone who disagrees with this stuff are idiots, or they're secret nefarious fascists, or they're being paid off by the capitalists, or what have you. And if that's the case, then there really is no need for a further conversation, which could complicate the narrative. It's just that's just what there is. Julian Peacock says, for $2, says you can't play terrorists. Give Russia Afghanistan. Yeah, okay, I caught that. So basically, the implicit thing is that we funded the terrorists against the Russians, and this is the necessary complication in history. What side can you play in any historical war that's not villainous? If we were to take an honest view of history, in many ways, this is July 4th. A lot of what the revolutionaries did, especially in the South, especially in the Southern theater of war during the Revolutionary War, that was kicked off, on July 4th in 1776, that was terrorism. They were like murdering Tory civilians. They were suppressing uprisings among poor whites and sometimes among slaves, because the British were trying to use anti-landholder sentiment to fight a loyalist war against the revolutionaries. And the retaliations on both sides were absolutely atrocious. Okay, so I guess we shouldn't portray the revolutionaries in a neutral light. Should they be portrayed negatively? Do we have to? Does every rendition of the Revolutionary War have to have necessarily a Tory sentiment attached to it? Well, I guess maybe we should ban the 4th of July. It's just, there's no way you could have the perspective that Extra Credits is trying to put forward without transforming every piece of media we consume in this country into sort of like a Sovietistic social realist perspective, where every single piece of art we consume literally has to imbibe and promote the correct political ideology that the state wants to take forward, where pacifistic liberalism and integrationism and globalism is the de facto good thing, and any deviation from that by communicating implicitly that there are two sides to wars has to be essentially whitewashed out of history and consigned to academic investigations of history through simulation and through studies of dusty tomes. I can't tell you. This would just be a coarsening of our culture that would be really unparalleled in this country since really the 19th century. Maybe certain areas of history, like the Winston Churchill administration during World War One, or during the FDR administration during the New Deal or World War Two, were in this sort of mode where the state literally was trying to throttle anything that wasn't explicitly propaganda. But if we're going back to this in more or less peacetime circumstances, wow. Yeah, at that point, the reactionary right wingers have to become the counterculture, because we will have totally destroyed any kind of thoughtful culture in the mainstream. So Thomas Jockton for $20. Gee, thanks a lot for that. Very generous contribution. He says, thank you for your thoughtfulness and contributions to the YouTube community. Fostering understanding is the greatest gift one can provide. Question, what is your account of Arch and Oasia? Are principles divine substances? Is this Is this the question of over whether the Word of God is God? Like, okay, this is the Arian heresy. Okay, so I can't like read up on this in the second, but originally I thought this was sort of like the Orthodox versus Catholic argument over like the particular derivation of the Holy Spirit in relationship to the Father and the Son. But it looks like it also crosses over into whether Jesus being the Word of God means that he is of the same substance as God. For my money, and this is so beyond my pay grade that I feel like I'm almost being insulting trying to answer this within a live stream. Being the Word of God means that you are of one substance with God. I embrace the Catholic Trinitarian view of this. I do think that there is a distinction in personhood, which is what creates the fundamental mystery of the Trinity. But we are getting to the heart of why the Trinity is the Trinity and not a Unitarian conception, nor an Arianist one. I believe that the Orthodox view of this matter was the correct one. That we can neither deny the distinct personhoods nor divide the substance that is God. That we are bound to confess that God is one and that one is three persons, and that this is not a contradiction nor something that can be very easily discussed outside of asserting that the Trinity is one God in mystery. I'm not so sure that, and this is something that has to be essentially addressed by professional theologians and priests. It's not something that can be taken on by political YouTubers who are interested in political concepts like me. It's not a political concept. Christendom should not be forced to answer this in a political context. Come to a theological context, we'll have a discussion. But I don't believe that that Muslims or progressive Christians or progressive heretics can come to us and force us to essentially qualify this as a precondition to realizing Christendom's necessary interests, both secularly and theologically, in real political circumstances, if that helps. But I probably haven't said anything that's making very much sense to people. Alex Henry for $5. Just a contribution. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. For £2, Patrick, is Cyberpunk reactionary? Yes, and I need to restart my Trad Codex series so I can get to Cyberpunk eventually after we do Bioshock Infinite and anime. $5, all good. For Son of Tiamat for $5 says, good old extra credits. I'd forgotten that pretentious hipsters they were. What pretentious hipsters they were. Thanks for reminding me, Dave. Now I have to wash my brain with bleach. Oh yeah, the goatee really makes it, doesn't it? Like, has he even thought at all? Like, have they given as much thought to the consequences of these ideas if they were embraced in their totality? And so, to the extent that they've given to their posture, their goatee, their ability to kind of like scoff at people lower than them, like it doesn't appear at all like that's the case. Andrew Stratelites, Andrew, I just call you Andrew on Twitter, man. I apologize for mangling your name. For $5, what infrastructure do we need, cultural, physical, and technological, to retain trad counterculture going forward? Wow, that's a big question. We need to have the ability so that anybody can contact a trad community and feel like they're among colleagues regardless of where they live. I had sort of a trad community in Seattle that I was plugged into at least a little bit. And obviously when I got really busy with my PhD and my YouTube career, I kind of stepped away from that a little bit. But now that I've moved, I feel really isolated. And it's kind of been funny, but I've been trying to find people who've been reactionaries or want to meet up in this environment. And it's been very, very hard to find those people. I think that in order for a counterculture to exist, it needs to be easy to find it. It needs to be as easy to find the trad countercultural, both online and physically, as it was to find the gay counterculture online and physically in the 90s. And that's a very, very tall order, because I do not think that we're very scared of retaliations that are very, very real. And that's something that we have to think about going forward. I'm going to continue to answer this question, but I need to take a slight break, and then we'll go forward and answer the new questions, and some of the new the new super chat. So I'm going to mute myself very briefly for 5 minutes, and I'll be right back. All right, so I'm back. Apologize for that dead air, but let's get back to answering some super chats. Quick, whilst he's gone, commence the Reformation. Yeah. Believe it or not, ContraPoints sees themselves as the new Martin Luther, which raises questions to where Reformed Christianity has ultimately led. It starts with Martin Luther and ends with ContraPoints. And I know. It's just like I deeply respect a lot of Protestant pastors like Paul Vanderklay, and and if I'm being quite honest, some some things like the total depravity of man, I kind of emotionally believe it, even though I have quibbles over its absolute accuracy. uh, in in the uh, in the um, in the theological sense. But I think that we need to reestablish Christendom, and the only way I can see us reestablishing Christendom is to delete the Reformation as a political concept, even if the theological arguments exist behind the scenes. And I think that's sort of where I'm at right now. I think the Reformation is over. The Reformation is politically over, and we need to start going back to viewing Christendom the way Dante did, both both as sort of a European Christendom that's an extension of Rome, and also a worldwide Christendom that's an extension of the Church. And those need to be the two political forces that define humanity in the coming post progressive age, because I do think progressivism is collapsing before our eyes, and it will be replaced with some kind of technocratic utopianism that's driven by artificial intelligence. Anyway, uh, thank you, Andrew, for your super chat. I see Aged Boomer for $5 saying, check out the YouTube channel Fourth Age. RJ offers critiques of the comic book industry. He would be good for a discussion on Comicsgate. Maybe I could have him on with Micah Curtis. Micah Curtis is one of the people who I promised I would have on, so I subscribed to that. That looks kind of cool. I am a comic book fan, but I'm a super pretentious comic book fan. I hate superheroes. I like comic books like David B, Epileptic, the kind of French comics where like they're mostly about psychology and stuff like that. The closest I ever got to reading superhero comics was reading Neil Gaiman's Sandman series, which I still think is good, although it's been a while since I reread it. It's my first encounter with G.K. Chesterton, who was actually a character inside the comic series Sandman, quite a prominent one actually. And Neil Gaiman, despite I think being an atheist, is a fan of Chesterton. I think he should explore that a little bit more deeply, but we'll see where that goes. Charlemagne for $2 says, I found this really good channel, the Ushanka Show. Let's just Google that really quickly and see what comes up. Ooh, that's big. What do they do? Looks like they document old Soviet stuff, which by present day terms is highly reactionary. But hey, looks cool. I love historical channels, and it's not, I'm unlike progressives. I'm not historically offended by the concept that there weren't good things in the Soviet Union. I hate Stalin and Trotsky and Lenin, and I think their ideas were crap. But that does not mean that I don't deeply respect what they were able to achieve militaristically. My grandfather fought against the Red Army. Do you think I think that does not mean that I don't respect the heroism of the Red Army? I would be horribly if right now I became dictator of the world and reactionary ideas triumphed. I would be horrified if we took down monuments that were designed to honor the military efforts of the Red Army. And that's because the military, and I'm kind of quoting Nietzsche and a variety of other reactionary authors, the act of sacrificing your own personhood to a larger cause is in a sense so heroic that even when done for an utterly odious political entity that is the Communist Party, it itself is a heroic act. And the Slavs who fought against the Germans who came into their lands for the fatherland were doing something that was genuinely heroic, even if the ultimate political ends of Stalin and Trotsky were disgusting. And for that reason, I think that we have to conceptualize their struggle as such. But thank you for the recommendation, Charlemagne, and the super chat. Okay, so Lake for $2 said, did you read Kaczynski Thoughts? Bombs are bad, obviously. Yeah, I have read Kaczynski a long time ago, not since I became right wing. I'm highly sympathetic to primitivism, but it's just not enough. It's just primitivism is not a practical political ideology, and in my ideal world, primitivist primitivist human communities would be held symbiotically in tandem with technological reactionary societies, such that technology would be put to the use of the human person cultivated within traditionalist, separatist religious communities, and these would sort of feed off of each other, and that's my that would be a utopia, obviously, because there would be hardships in both worlds. There would be a hardship of humans to essentially not exist, because I imagine it more like the Amish, inside communities of separatism that were religiously devout, and there would be a struggle of the human soul against technology in the spaces that were technological and productive and globalist. But I think that in some sense, symbiotically developing tradition among a technological global superstructure means that we have to have spaces where technology is banned, and where humans can do things themselves, even though it can be done more easily by technology. But at the same time, like, any insight that Kaczynski has over on top of inside sort of like the abstract ethical dimension has to be held in tandem with how idiotic his ideas about practical political persuasion were, which his practical theory on politics, aka mailing bombs to people who were involved in computer science, which is more or less my field and my father's field, probably set back his very valid ideas about how humans interacted with technology 20 years. We're only now returning to his ideas, and they should have been part of the conversation since 1996, but they weren't, because he sent bombs to people. I mean, it's kind of obvious, and this is why I don't think you can divorce. I don't think that conversations about what's ethically good in the abstract, they have to be held in tandem and at the same time separate from what's practically achievable, which is, again, goes back to the original idea that Machiavelli and Dante, that Thomas Aquinas and Frederick II and Machiavelli have to be held in tandem. They have to be held separate, but at the same time part of what it means to be operating inside Christendom. Okay, let me make sure I didn't miss a super chat. KYL for $10 says Joel Davis's formalism is a very helpful idea in terms of building infrastructure. He is a generative anthropology guy linked with Trudel Tom. He said he'd be interested in talking to you. Sorry, possibly to add to your to-do list. Okay, I'm very interested in formalism, so that might go to the top of it. But yeah, again, yeah, I'll try to get around to it. Joel Davis, does he have a YouTube channel? Maybe you can reply me. But let's do, before we do this, let's do again, this is gonna be painful. We're going to do a Liberal Sanity Project video. I apologize, but I'm just so tired of this stupid argument about abortion. And of course, Liberal Sanity Project, terrible YouTuber, terrible person, not a good faith actor, and the only thing they ever do is tag on to people who actually do thinking, whether they're either university professors or whoever's hot on the left. Like, Crown T, now apparently the guy is hanging out with the serfs and other Antifa types. Yeah, they blocked me on Twitter, which is, it's kind of funny. They blocked me on Twitter because I basically explained to them in a DM why I thought they were a bad faith actor. To make a long story short, Liberal Sanity Project tried to shame me for giving money to the victims of the mosque shooting. They tried to shame me because there were some objections to why I was giving money to enemies of Christendom when they were victims. And my explanation is and always is that part of being a proper defender of Christendom, part of being a knight of, and I don't consider myself a knight, but I aspire to be someone who politically stands for Christendom. Part of that is the chivalric concept of helping your enemies when they've been unjustly done against. When an enemy has been hurt, you help them. Unless they're being punished justly for a specific act of iniquity. If Antifa gets banned by the federal government, I'm not going to donate to Antifa. But if an honorable enemy, like a rival religion, is terroristically killed when they're attempting to do good, aka praying to the Creator, then it is incumbent, even if there are rivals, to help them in their era of need, in the same way that the Samaritan helped the person who was waylaid in Jesus's story. That's just proper warfare. That's proper honorable warfare. Muslims, I believe, are theologically wrong, but for the most part, they are honorable. And because they're honorable, they need to be dealt with honorably, which means helping them when they've been hurt. Antifa, which is an dishonorable piece of shit organization that kicks people while they're down, that does disservices to people. I do not believe that they need to have the same respect paid to them, because they are not rival armies, they're not rival religions, they're criminals. They're criminals, and they are backstabbers, and they're thugs, and they just need to be dealt with which is much harshness, with whatever legitimate authority can be brought against criminals and thugs. But rival nations and armies need to be dealt with respect and honorable warfare, in my opinion, and in the opinions of most people throughout history who wrote about just war theory. But Liberal Sanity Project, when he saw that people made this objection, tried to shame the community, tried to shame the community of the Cana Society for simply being associated with people that were skeptical of charity to our enemies or to our rivals, because enemies might be rivals, let's say. I just have so little respect for people who try to use charity to shame the community that's giving the charity. It's so disgusting that I just, and I had, for other reasons, Liberal Sanity Project has essentially been trying to guilt by association me since I've known him, and I hate that. It's gross. And now I look on his channel, and he's gone right from being a Crown Tea liberalist to apparently being associated with the guys who like Antifa. So the guy has absolutely no principles. He's not a liberal. He's now associating with people who hate liberals. But we're going to review a video of his anyway, despite the fact that he's a bad faith actor, just because I think at this point he's being a proper mouthpiece for a particular view. Okay, so I have been told that the video is a little bit too loud, so I'm going to turn down the volume here, and you guys can tell me if it's too soft. I see a super chat here. So, Son of Tiamat for $5. What do you think of the idea that left-wingers are just secular Manichaeans? Well, are you talking about sort of the Zoroastrian heresy? This is an idea that I've been floating for a while. I mean, left-wingers are essentially the evolution of progressive mainline Protestantism. There was a conference that happened in the 1920s, I think, where basically mainline Protestantism abolished itself. And mainline progressivism is the evolution of Protestantism, where Protestantism, where the Reformation essentially decides that it's going to cancel God and Christianity. It's basically going to become Protestantism without Christ, which is the best description of progressivism that I have currently. Now, in this process, in this evolution, did they find their way back to an earlier heresy? That sounds very likely. I would be totally unsurprised if they had remade the mistakes of the Manichaeans. But maybe they're also just committing sort of psychological problems. I mean, I don't think that progressives actually believe in good and evil, but I think that this is sort of the problem that they're facing, the crisis of liberal progressivism, the evolution of Christianity away from Christ, is that they originally, the whole idea of abolishing Christ and God was that they didn't really believe in good and evil. But now they're confronted with reactionaries, both terrorists, as extra credits would say, and also people like myself who are dissident right-wingers who reject the Enlightenment. They can't engage with me in conversation, so they have to come up with reasons why I'm so bad that they can't even confront me, which is why they have to resurrect the notion of evil, even though the entire impetus for what they are is a rejection of evil. And so this is why Manichaean ideas have to be re-embraced, either through re-embracing communism or anarcho-communism, like BreadTube, or maybe doing something else. I don't know what specific thing the Son of Tiamat's referring to when he says Manichaean, but it's not a secret to me that a large amount of the reason why people are rejecting liberalism on the left is that they have to come up with an idea of evil, and the best they can come up with in their secular worldview is communism, which treats the reactionary as something that needs to be destroyed, and not confronted in any kind of dialectic. It needs to be sort of denied the dialectic. And I'm not so sure Hegel would agree, or Slavoj Zizek, and I never pronounced the guy's name right. I'm sorry. People always give me shit about that. They probably would disagree with that. Maybe Marx would even disagree with that. But the current iteration of BreadTube is to essentially destroy and deny the reactionary and not confront them. And yeah. I'm going to start playing this video and then answer the super chats after the video. Okay. And tell me if the volume's wrong.
Anyone who has watched this videotape, I dare Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama to watch these tapes. Watch a fully formed fetus on the table, its heart beating, its legs kicking, while someone says we have to keep it alive to harvest its brain.
Okay, so the shrillness of Carly Farina aside, is the volume okay with that clip? While people answer, I'm going to do the super chat. So Jens Cederberg for €5 says, a response to Son of Tiamat, Moldbug got it more or less right, more right than anyone I have seen. 1, it's Whiggery, and 2, in its alliance based on self-interest to achieve power. Yeah, I think that's more or less. I mean, Whiggery itself is sort of the Protestant ethic of... it's one idea that there's a reforming progress in Christianity that has to continuously move forward. Turn it down 10%. Okay, that's fair enough. Okay, some of it might be Carly Farina's shrill voice, but let's do that.
By the way, my position on this should be clear at this point. Irresponsible behavior, i.e. engaging in sexual activity without appreciating the consequences, is no justification for terminating an innocent life.
If they survive, that it still makes sense that you can still abort the baby while it's literally a living child.
The baby is born. The mother meets with the doctor. They take care of the baby.
Once... the proponents here we have are the shrillest executive in California, Carly Farina, Donald Trump, an armored skeptic, at the point where they're delivering devastating pro-life arguments that probably LSP is going to fail to answer. I think you might have kind of a slam dunk issue on your hands, LSP, or Progressive Tube in general. Just saying. I mean, these guys aren't exactly Robert Scruton, and last time I checked.
Wrap the baby beautifully. And then the doctor and the mother determine whether or not they will execute the baby.
Imagine that you walk into a room, and in this room you see a grown man in a box of bulletproof glass with a baby sleeping in a crib, and this man is about to shoot this baby in the head. It just so happens that right next to you is a button that can send a shock to this man's heart, instantly killing him and saving the baby. Pushing this button is the only way you know that he will not carry through with this action, which you would surely view as murder. Do you do it? If you've answered yes, then you must agree that you have some sort of moral obligation to stop people from committing murder.
Okay, so I am going to do I'm stopping myself before I promise an additional video, but I've written an outline that that takes on, and it's always just a question of what's the next one in the pipe. Maybe since this is a day off for me, maybe I can record the democracy one today, and then release that one, and the B-side distribute his takes on epistemology more or less at the same time, sometime around next week. Maybe I could do that. But I have an outline for a video that confronts Philosophy Tube's video on abortion. But it basically deals with this idiotic idea of like the rights thought experiment. Now keep in mind, people are notoriously bad at doing these thought experiments in a consistent way. If these thought experiments exploded sort of moral instincts altogether, then the trolley problem would demonstrate that no one really believed that murder was wrong. But of course, that's not how these things work. And I think I would say that thought experiments themselves aren't really what's the problem. The problem is our concept of rights. But I will think that even in this circumstances, we'll see that the pro-choice view does not sustain. But let's continue. I will say that this whole idea of like these violinist arguments, and that's obviously what's coming. They don't really. What's so funny about them is that the pro-choicers parade them as if they're like the solution, but they're really not. They're really really bad arguments, as we'll see.
You must believe that it is okay for you or others to take one life to save another life. You must agree with this principle that the death of a murderer is justified in light of saving innocent life.
By the way, I would not frame my view of justice this way. Absolutely not. The right, it's this particular circumstance where like killing is necessary. Killing is sort of a responsibility that we have to take upon ourselves from time to time in certain circumstances that Thomas Aquinas described in his just war theory. But it's not this sort of like exchange life for a life trolley problem right thing that the Liberal Sandy Project is kind of trying to force the dialectic into. It's way more complicated than that. And phrasing things in terms of responsibilities, in my view, is a much more direct way to talk about rights. But because it's post-Enlightenment and because we've misinterpreted Aquinas and half of the other Christian thinkers that use rights in the late Middle Ages, we're stuck in this kind of trolley problem dilemma that's constantly degrading our idea of how we discuss responsibility. But let's continue playing this because it's 20 minutes and I don't want to go on for another hour.
Now ask yourself if you truly believe this. Is abortion murder?
Yes. I mean, it's an unjustified taking of a human life. Now, that does not mean that the fact that things coincidentally happen people die all the time of a heart attack. That does not make murder wrong, or that does not make my responsibility. That does not make. For instance, while I'm doing this live stream, there are going to be 1,000 people in Africa that die of preventable diseases. And if I stopped what I was doing, flew to Africa, and dedicated my life to saving them, then I probably could save one life. But I'm not doing that in this time. So does that mean that I'm murdering them implicitly? Well, no. Which is why this whole rights-based talk gets you into Peter Singer land, where suddenly it's okay to murder 2-year-olds, and it's all right to murder a 2-year-old as long as you write a $1,000 check to a poverty relief program in Africa that will save 5 African children. This is stupid. Abortion is definitively murder, but this exchange trolley problem brings us into all sorts of idiotic ideas in the Peter Singer school that make this idea idiotic.
If you've answered yes, then it is now incumbent upon you to ask yourself a question. Do you or others have a moral obligation to kill abortion doctors?
No, under just war theory, because killing abortion doctors, so even accepting that, like, okay, they're going to shoot this baby, I can kill them. Now, killing the person who's about to shoot the baby would only be morally incumbent upon me if another person wouldn't instantly walk into the room and shoot the baby. If it's like, I can kill this person and this would end abortion forever, then that might be some kind of analogy. But it's not. Like, the person who doesn't get the abortion there is just going to get it somewhere else. And killing the abortion doctor is going to politically set back the cause of making abortion less common, which is the only thing that that's morally incumbent upon me to do. It's a ridiculous analogy, and it's really stupid. If you want to make abortions, or the pro-life movement, which in my mind has been the predominant movement that stigmatized abortion in this country and is making abortions less common than, say, they are in the former Soviet Union, where abortion is seen as birth control, then, like, the abortion murders of abortion doctors has actually hindered our attempt to stigmatize abortion. And so in that sense, politically, it's disastrous and creates the inverse of the reality. But of course, we're blinded by a rights language, so we can't talk about that, right?
If you've answered no, then you have to go back to the first step and start over. Find the difference between the scenario first described, wherein you commit to killing one person to save another, but not the latter scenario.
Well, I already answered it. It's because killing abortion doctors does not end abortion. It does not directly lead to the abortion not occurring. So no life is being saved by killing abortion doctors. Only ending life is accomplished. It's basically killing the person who's about to kill the baby only for another person to pick up the gun and kill the baby. In the end, all you've done is kill the abortion doctor. And not only that, you've actually made it more likely that more abortions will take place. You've made the people who want to normalize abortion more powerful in this country. So politically, it's totally unsustainable. Not only that, but we're going to get into this argument again that not all unjust taking of life not all unjust taking of life has to be punished with capital punishment. And the just punishments are going to vary based on the circumstances. And I'm sure LSP is going to bring this up, so I'm going to let the video play.
Where no such obligation appears to exist, even though you think abortion is murder. If you still cannot reconcile a difference between these two scenarios, then accept that at some point in your reasoning process, you lied to yourself. The only answer I could see being given is that one is legally sanctioned and the other is not. But falling back on the law is lazy. You cannot defer to philosophy when it's easy, but fall back to the law when it's hard.
I mean, we could just turn this around and say, okay, LSP, a baby's fallen into a coma and the mother does not want to take care of it. Do you think that the mother should be able to kill the baby while it's in the coma? Well, what's the difference between the baby outside of the womb and the baby inside the womb? There really isn't any. So at some point, when you think that it's okay to kill the baby in the womb, but not the baby outside of it, you're falling back to the law. And do you know what? Liberal philosophers like Peter Singer think that this is perfectly good reason. They've written philosophy papers about how it might be okay to kill people up to the point when they're actually toddlers. I mean, I don't know. This is the sort of, I mean, and I know that there's, I genuinely wonder how Liberal Sanity Project would react to this. I don't think, and this is one reason why I don't think Liberal Sanity Project is a good faith thinker. he hasn't actually asked himself these hard questions in the converse. He just thinks he has a gotcha, the same way that he thought that Crown T dug up a gotcha against Black Pigeon Speaks, and he wants to ride the self-righteousness train long enough in order to lay down some truth against the pro-lifers. And that's really all he's interested in. He's not actually interested in how we conceptualize murder against infants, because if he was, he'd have to embrace the Peter Singer view.
This position posits that...
Oh, hey, LSP. It looks like LSP is in the chat. Well, hey, if you want to come on and explain your view, I'll let you. I can send you a link. You have to unblock me on Twitter, though.
Should the law allow for murder, you would take no action to stop it from happening. If the law allowed the person in the first scenario to shoot a baby in the head, would you just ignore the button? Would you really just look the other way?
I mean, yeah. I mean, I would. I mean, like, let's just say that I'm in communist Russia, right? And a commissar is starving peasants. If killing the commissar is not going to politically operatively save the peasants, then I'm not going to kill the commissar. I'm going to do something like, it's incumbent upon me to politically act in a way that will end the killing, not to just lash out violently against the instrument of that killing. I'm not going to assassinate the hangman who's going to hang a person unjustly, because then a new hangman will just be brought in. They're acting as a function of a larger political order. I mean, the Roman soldiers who nailed Christ to the cross weren't really the people who killed Christ. The people who killed Christ were Judas, the Caiaphas and the temple Pharisees that lobbied for him to be put to death. Pontius Pilate indirectly, even though he washed his hands of it. The Roman soldiers that killed him, they were part of the process, but they were really only secondary in that process. And one of them immediately repented of it. So really the people who carry out these political orders are really secondary instruments. And for this reason, even the people who killed the Jews in the Holocaust, the people at the Wannsee conference who put the final solution into effect, who politically lobbied for it, the people who actually operated the concentration camps. I mean, I guess you could kill them if they would politically end the war, but I don't think that, like, justly just shooting them because they're the ones operating it and then new people will be brought in, that's really questionable. I don't think Liberal Sandy Project has thought this through properly.
Alabama recently signed into law the nation's most restrictive abortion legislation. Legislation that will undoubtedly be overturned in the courts, but until then, we have to deal with it. The law, ironically titled the Human Life Protection Act, will make those who wish to seek abortions turn to dangerous methods out of panic. This law makes an abortion a Class A felony in nearly all cases. Class A felonies carry a minimum sentence of 10 years and a maximum sentence of life.
I mean, once more, we can politically adjust the consequences for abortion. I'll give you another example. Killing in war is technically murder under the strict definition. It is taking of life. It is, or for instance, even the Allied Bomber Command, right? During World War II, they bombed civilian areas. That was the unjust taking of human life. Are they murderers? Well, technically speaking, yes. If we revisited World War II crimes, would I want to put octogenarians on death row because they bombed a Japanese or a German city? Absolutely not. The political apparatus that delivered murder does not necessarily mean that we have to embrace consequences that punish people. There are mitigating circumstances. I consider abortion to be a murder that is a crime of passion. And I think that we need to be very, very understanding of people who commit murder in the form of abortion, even abortion doctors, because we have to understand that they're acting as the apparatus to a sick culture, more or less like the people who were impressed into service to serve the Nazis' goals in Eastern Europe, which were murderous very many times. They were fighting against other people who were murderous, but that does not excuse it. So we have to be very, very understanding of these circumstances as they come up. Otherwise, we get into the autism that so maybe we can't play abortionists in video games because then we're normalizing murder and abortion. I mean, the idea is we can recognize a historical evil and still have the maturity to understand that the people carrying out that evil need to be dealt with in a political manner that is not simply brought to the extreme. And this is one of the reasons why right-based thinking needs to be done away with. And this is one of the reasons why I need to make a video on this and not just deal with this in sort of the extemporaneous way that I deal with it on live streams. This needs to be better written out, because this really gets to the heart of why this thinking either leads to the thinking of the extra credits video, where you can't even be a soldier in the Nazi army, or you're going into Peter Singer land where it's okay to smother a 2-year-old because they're not a fully developed human.
The bill is designed to invoke a response from the courts such that it inevitably gets appealed to the Supreme Court, where conservatives hope for an overturn of Roe v. Wade. Roe v. Wade was a landmark decision by the Supreme Court, which found that the right for women to access abortion falls under privacy protections.
I challenge you to find that in the Constitution, LSP. Look, I see LSP in the frickin' chat. Like, maybe I'll take a second to do super chats now, but like, dude, just unblock me on Twitter and DM me. Like, I think I'm following you here. I can just do it right now. LS. Well, okay, I'm never going to find you because you blocked me. But, like, dude, you can come on to this chat and you can talk about the video afterwards. Like, I'll give you a chance to answer for this. Absolutely. Like, go for it. Here, I'll answer chats at the halfway mark.
I challenge you now to go and read the Constitution. Find for me where the right to privacy exists. If you are a literalist, you will find it mentioned nowhere, but the right is there.
It's funny how if you're a progressive or a liberal, like Liberal Sanity Project, rights just kind of pop up into existence in texts where they obviously don't exist. I mean, there are explicit prohibitions, for instance, against the federal government taking powers in the form of any number of things, like the Commerce Clause. It's only supposed to really regulate 1 or 2 items outside of interstate commerce. That's the extent of the role of what the federal government can really do. Yet we have all of these things like Social Security, federalized welfare programs, Obamacare. These things would be explicitly prohibited among any understanding either of the text of the Constitution or of the intention of the people who wrote the Constitution. Yet magically we've ignored those and we've discovered new rights inside this penumbra of the Fourth Amendment.
It exists within the framework of the Third Amendment's protections against quartering, or the Fourth Amendment's protections against unreasonable searches and seizures, or the Ninth Amendment's declaration that enumerated rights should not be construed to mean that the people have no other rights. Where the Roe Court found the right, however, was in the 14th Amendment's Due Process Clause. No state shall deprive a person of life, liberty, or property without due process. That guarantee to liberty that the state cannot infringe upon includes the rights to privacy.
Okay, but the problem is that like this itself, unless you're saying that, does this just abolish the government's ability to force you to do anything? I mean, does this abolish the government's ability to force you to buy healthcare? I mean, isn't that liberty? Does this remove the government's ability to ban substances like marijuana? I mean, is this so expansive that it essentially enforces libertarianism? And even if it did enforce libertarianism, it still wouldn't even touch on abortion because of the exception of life, right? No state shall deprive any person of life, liberty, property without due process of law. Well, does that mean that we can't ban murders because we can't have any control over hospital treatment and medical malpractice because that would infringe upon the liberty of doctors? Presumably the life clause is there to ensure that liberty does not get used as an excuse to justify manslaughter and murder, right? There's no way the Founding Fathers or the people who wrote the 14th Amendment would ever assume that this was so broad as to ban all instances of states trying to restrict killing, let alone things like birth control or sexuality.
The court rejected this argument that the unborn were included provisionally in these same rights, nullifying this argument that the right to life is applied to the unborn.
But it wasn't decided on the text. It was decided because an unelected judge in the 70s, or several of them, thought for really intractable reasons that they would exclude one group from the right of life and then expand the concept of liberty and property to an area of liberty and property where it had really never been expanded before. How can California, for instance, ban elective gay conversion therapy? Just a therapy procedure. They in this state I currently reside in right now, it is illegal for you to pay a psychologist to talk you out of being gay. But that doesn't violate the Liberty Clause, even though it's a elective medical procedure. Why? It's because this sentence does not mean what Liberal Sanity Project thinks it means, or is trying to imply furiously that it does mean, or it's not trying to. It doesn't mean what the Warren Court was trying to imply that it meant. It's obvious that it doesn't mean this, and it just. At this point, we're just saying that we can make up stuff and put it into the Constitution, effectively. You know, there's no other way to conceptualize this.
To quote Justice Blackmun,
all this, together with our observation supra, that throughout the major portion of the 19th century, prevailing legal abortion practices were far freer than they are today, persuades us that the word person, as used in the 14th Amendment, does not include the unborn.
And further, from the Roe opinion,
Texas urges that, apart from the 14th Amendment, life begins at conception and is present throughout pregnancy, and that, therefore, the state has a compelling interest in protecting that life from and after conception. We need not resolve the difficult question as to when life begins. When those trained in the respective disciplines of medicine, philosophy, and theology are unable to arrive at any consensus, the judiciary, at this point in the development of man's knowledge, is not in a position to speculate as to the answer.
This is to say that the question of when life begins was never an issue before the court, only that the court knew based on precedent that life, for the purposes of law, never applied to the unborn.
That is to say that they considered it to discard it. If could you use arguments of Roe v. Wade to kill dependent children? I mean, this is just ridiculous. It's kind of insane when you think about it for more than 5 seconds. I'm pretty sure LSP hasn't thought of this.
Question is a deeply philosophical question and not one of science or one of justice. In 1965, Connecticut's statute preventing the use of contraception was overturned by the Supreme Court in a case called Griswold v. Connecticut, a case in which the court laid the groundwork for one's rights to privacy. This same case law was referenced in the Roe decision only a few years later.
I mean, so yeah, this is how it works. They expanded privacy to include birth control, and then they basically qualified abortion as a form of birth control. That's how this worked, with no attention paid to life other than to dismiss it out of hand, like LSP said that they did. This is how you can essentially write in things into the Constitution that were never there. I mean, how does this? So it basically means that if a court said it in the past, then they can continuously expand it on and on and on and on and on in any direction that they like because of court precedent. This is insane. It basically makes, over time, it makes the court a legislator, and I don't see how it couldn't at that stage.
Simply put, the right to privacy exists. The court did not err in its Roe decision, which is why it affirmed it years later in Planned Parenthood versus Casey, which established the undue burden standard for access to abortion. Is requiring the consent of your spouse to get an abortion legal? No. It presents an undue burden on one individual to access their rights.
I mean, okay, you can say that, right? Does requiring... But why do you have a right to gay conversion therapy as an adult? Why don't you? Why don't you have the right to pay a psychologist to talk you out of being gay? Like, if you don't want to be, you can have a psychologist convince you. Like, if you say, I don't want to be a man, psychologists encourage me to believe that I'm not one. You will be able to find psychologists that will talk you into that, right? But the opposite of sexuality is illegal in the state. Is that abridgment of your rights? By the way, I don't think that it is. I think that states could ban a medical procedure because I'm operating under the assumption that we can formalize law with intention in text. And if we can't formalize law with intention and text, if it's an appeal to law either has to be an appeal to the text or an appeal to the intention. What else is there? The precedents of unelected judges that were never given the right to make law to begin with? It makes no sense. This is a question of legalism and formalism more than it is a philosophical question. Although I suspect the philosophical question will come up.
The argument for abortion typically rely on the weakest of declarations. Personhood, they argue, begins from the moment of conception. Conception itself is a process, but I think what most who argue this think is that personhood begins the moment a sperm meets an egg. This thinking is flawed. Is a chicken egg a chicken? Is an oak seed an oak tree? And even if we grant that this is a person from the moment of conception, there are numerous problems with this standard.
Well, I'll say this. If you talk to a pro-choicer, they will concede that scientifically the fetus is human. So this whole is an oak seed an oak? The answer is that a fertilized zygote is a specimen of the species. It has the DNA. That's how we scientifically classify things. And this is essentially misdirection on the part of LSP. He knows that this doesn't hold up. And if you catch a pro-choicer in a debate, and everyone will tell you this, they'll concede it's human. They'll just deny that it's a person, which again is not a scientific classification, it's a moral and metaphysical one. So they will digress away from the scientific question over whether the fetus is a person. They'll digress away from the scientific question over whether the fetus is human, towards the metaphysical question over whether it should have personhood or rights. I think LSP is hoping that you don't know that this concession has been made at the higher levels of the pro-life versus pro-choice debate. He's just hoping that, like, this is always kind of the atheist contention, is that since they're on the negative, they can bring up 10,000 like bad reasons not to believe. And then it creates the impression in your mind that this belief is such a minefield of uncertainty that it's just better for you to walk away and accept the default. And the default is always atheism, liberalism, progressivism. And they're counting on that. And the reason why it's so comfortable for I said, like, negativist charlatans to do this is because they understand that they're in power, they hold the defaults, and they really only need they only need to do this to encourage confusion over this, even if the point has been conceded in most contexts.
What if conception happens but not implantation? And when in conception? When cellular division happens? If conception happens and a woman takes a pill to stop the implantation, is that an abortion? If a sperm meets an egg, and the sperm is then teleported out of the egg through some weird futuristic magic powers, is that murder? This standard is clearly inadequate. The Alabama standard was set at 6 weeks when the law declared that heartbeat begins, even though heartbeat begins around 4 weeks.
Okay, so we're agreeing that what LSP is objecting to at this stage of the video, at least, is not the political end of the pro-life movement. Pro-life movements never attach, typically, in legalization to conception. They attach usually to heartbeat, sometimes to implantation. Now, as a Catholic, spiritually, I believe that the conceived life is still life. But this gets us to, people who die of heart attacks, or people who are dying elsewhere in the world of starvation outside of American law. We can concede that there are indeed human lives that are ending. They're outside the ability of the law to impact. That's never been a barrier to doing murder law or anything else like that. Hold on a second. Okay, sorry guys. Neighbors wanted to introduce themselves. This is always the problem. God, I totally lost my train of thought. We got to get through this video.
The problem with this is that it is not uncommon for women to not realize they are even pregnant at this stage of the pregnancy. Does this standard present undue burden?
Well, it would if this was actually the conversation on legality. It doesn't in terms of just standard understanding. People die all the time. So what? I mean, basically, they Liberal Sanity Project wants to develop the standard where we epistemologically determine who is a person based on how easy it is to protect them. That's idiotic. I mean, okay, well, let's let this go for a little bit. But there's easy answers to this. It's so you have to be Peter Singer. You have to basically embrace Peter Singer levels of autism in order to not see how these distinctions have to exist, not just for abortion law, but for all law and for all moral considerations. Otherwise, everyone who's not spending every waking hour, making sure children in Africa don't starve is denying the personhood of Africans.
You would be hard-pressed to say no. It restricts women access to their rights before they even realize a need to utilize them. It is producing the warrant after the search. It is presenting the attorney after the trial.
This is sort of a common thing with LSP, and I don't know if this is a difference in thought, but this is mostly the reason why I consider him bad faith, is that he tries to discard people's arguments on technicalities. Okay, technically you lose this argument. Well, is that really the basis for all of this? I don't know. We'll see.
Do you know what an embryo looks like at 6 weeks development? It looks like this.
Looks like a human.
Less than the size of a quarter, organs improperly developed, enlarged and malformed head.
I mean, organs improperly developed, large or malformed head would be qualities we could use to describe a human child. Human childs have enlarged heads, their organs are not fully formed, etc., etc., etc. This is a ridiculous post hoc argument.
No viability. One day, it could become a person. But currently, this is as much a person as fertilized egg yolk is a chicken. Let's suppose that God himself wipes out all government in the world and personally appoints you dictator with unlimited legislative power. What punishment should women who receive abortions get? If you truly believe it is murder, should they be tried for murder?
That's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous assumption. We do not treat all murders the same. We do not treat war crimes the same. We do not treat manslaughter the same. And we certainly don't treat murders that happen in the course of attempting something else. This could easily, well, this is the same as first-degree murders. This could easily be accounted for as a special case, the same way we treat the other problems with manslaughter as special cases. And we could incorporate any kind of potential judgment we need to. This is why we can't develop this sort of autistic perspective towards ethics and politics that I think we're really trying to force ourselves into with the LSP's arguments. Again, the converse pro-choice thing is to say that we can murder 2-year-olds because they're dependent.
If a doctor performs an abortion, should they be executed, as some states would execute any other murderer? These are the questions one must confront if they truly believe abortion to be murder. Murder requires punishment. In an essay entitled A Defense of Abortion, Judith Thomas explores the philosophical quandaries present with abortion if we grant personhood starting with conception. This argument is famously known as the violinist argument.
It's Judith Jarvis Thompson was her name. And the problem is this argument's so bad, and pro-choicers, they think that like this is like the drop kick argument against pro-lifers, and it's so idiotic. We'll hear it. We'll hear it, and I mean, the second Judith Jarvis Thompson made this argument in the 70s, it was immediately answered by pro-lifers, and they never looked back. Yet every time it gets trotted out as like, oh, game over pro-life, and I have no fear of hearing the violinist argument. It's idiotic. It's like basically the only way you could conceptualize this is as being an argument for why we have to have legalized abortion is the same logic that would make it so that the trolley problem means that we need to have legalized murder. It's an idiotic thought experiment, and it's even worse than the trolley problem because it seems most of the times in most of its instances it leaves out sort of the critical relational dimension that exists in abortion that I think we'll get to when we go through this example in full.
In it, Judith posits this scenario.
You wake up in the morning and find yourself back to back in bed with an unconscious violinist, a famous unconscious violinist. He has been found to have a fatal kidney ailment, and the Society of Music Lovers has canvassed all the available medical records and found that you alone have the right blood type to help. They have therefore kidnapped you, and last night the violinist's circulatory system was plugged into yours, so that your kidneys can be used to extract poisons from his blood as well as your own. The director of the hospital now tells you, "Look, we're sorry the Society of Music Lovers did this to you. We would never have permitted it if we had known." But still they did it, and the violinist is now plugged into you. To unplug you would be to kill him. But never mind, it's only for 9 months. By then he will have recovered from his ailment and can safely be unplugged from you. Is it morally incumbent on you to accede to the situation? No doubt it would be very nice of you if you did, a great kindness, but do you have to accede to it? What if it were not 9 months but 9 years, or longer still? What if the director of the hospital says, "Tough luck, I agree, but now you've got to stay in bed with the violinist plugged into you for the rest of your life? Because remember this, all persons have a right to life, and violinists are persons. Granted, you have a right to decide what happens in and to your body, but a person's right to life outweighs your right to decide what happens in and to your body, so you cannot ever be unplugged from him."
So, I mean, this obviously, I actually think that in the 9-month instance, you probably would have a moral right to stay plugged in. But that's not what people are asking. People are asking about legal rights, legally enforced rights. And, well, I can see already that LSP is going to answer this question, or try to. And the obvious, but that's sort of secondary. You know, we could argue whether you have sort of like the Christian moral right to do this. But there's a big difference between the violinist circumstance and the circumstance of abortion. And that is, with the exception of the rape exception, which I already see appearing on the screen, which probably means that they're going to try to answer this. With the exception of the rape condition, the scenario of the violinist is insane. The scenario would only be fixed if you went up to the violinist and said, "Hey, violinist, how about this? You can pay me so that I'll be hooked up to you for 9 months. And then once you get the payment for being hooked up for 9 months and he's totally dependent on you, you pull the plug and kill him." And you created the situation where he was dependent on you. You performed an action that you got a payment for in terms of pleasure, with the understanding that this would create the dependence that, if violated, would kill another person. And then once you undertook to create that situation, you then use the situation to murder the person who became dependent on you for a situation that you yourself created. Yeah, that should absolutely be illegal. And if the violinist paid you to stay on life support with them for 9 months, and you accepted knowing that this was the consequence, then yes, I think you are legally responsible for that person. And that would be a very, very easy thing to enforce under our current concept of common law. And this is why this scenario is so stupid and so easy for any practical consideration for pro-lifers. At best, it's an argument about why there should be a rape exception.
The more astute amongst you would say that this situation is akin to rape, one of the few cases where abortion is seen as morally permissible. But why is this? What does this suggest? Does this suggest that some children do not have a right to life because they were conceived in illegitimate ways? Either life begins from the moment of conception and it's murder, or you disagree with this conceptually.
Look, only if you're an autist. Because the state has the ability to wage war and murder foreign civilians and conscript soldiers and send them to death, we know that the state illegalizes murder because it has a certain amount of human lives that it's incumbent to protect. But this right to life is not sort of an absolute right. It's incumbent upon the political concerns of the nation as a whole. So the fact that we create loopholes for this in the case of war, and in the case of, say, for instance, the police, because they're able to shoot people who they think are dangerous to the public order, because there's exceptions to that does not mean that we just obliterate the problems with murder overall. I mean, this is sort of like this Peter Singer, logical autist perspective, where once you're locked into this right-based thinking, you have to take everything to the extremes. And pretty soon it's either we have to make murder okay, or we have to be able to shoot 2-year-olds if they are ever lifting undue burden upon us and our ability to live our lives. It's a totally insane understanding of right-based concepts. Rights exist as political fixtures to carry out moral concepts of responsibility. That's what they are. They're political fixtures, and there can be exceptions. There are exceptions to them. And so, but of course, because we're autistic, we have to think, oh, well, an exception means that we can explode the entire example because I have no understanding of what practical politics actually means.
Is there any other situation where you would be allowed to kill one person as retaliation for a crime some other person committed? Of course not. So
yeah, war.
Why should abortion be acceptable in this situation if it is indeed killing one human being by another?
And I'm actually not certain that we should necessarily allow abortion in the case of rape. I think that is a legitimate political debate that we could have inside a society of rational Christian thinking people. Exactly how do we politically police abortion in the case of rape? I think that there is a legitimate Christian opinion to say that it's wrong to kill in the case of rape, but it still falls outside of the state purview to enforce. And then I think there's a legitimate argument that says that no, it's wrong and it falls inside the legitimate purview of the state to enforce. But that does not mean that the state has to necessarily autistically follow this all down the rabbit hole. I'm perfectly comfortable if Liberal Sanity Project is the ultra autist that, I don't mean to put down people with actual spectrum disorders, but in terms of, this monomaniacal obsession with models and the inability to understand the exceptions, if Liberal Sanity Project is someone who just does not have any ability to understand how we make practical exceptions for things in society and says that we have to illegalize abortion in the case of rape in order to legalize any abortion, then I'm on board with illegalizing abortion in the case of rape. That to me is an adequate price to pay. Although I don't think it's necessarily that simple in real life, where we actually don't just go completely up our own ass to make the rules more symmetrical.
This argument supposes the independence of the fetus in every other scenario but rape. It is an independent person with rights prescribed to it, such as life. However, that independence is revoked if that life is the product of rape.
But see, this is the thing. I think that this is sort of the video I want to make on abortion, because I think the pro-life side does have a winning rights-based argument. It does. When it comes down to it, the argument I'm making right now is the one rehearsed by National Review. It's the one that everyone knows it, everyone makes it. It's fine. It's good. But it's not... it's fundamentally not true to life, to our relationship to the child. Like, does a fetus have full rights? Well, of course it doesn't. It doesn't have a right of movement, of association. It's locked in a frickin' womb, right? It doesn't have full rights. And when it's born, does a baby have full rights? Does a 2-year-old have right of speech? By sending 6-year-olds to school compulsory, are we violating their rights? I mean, that's insane. Of course they don't have full rights. The rights of people at different points of their life are necessarily constrained. Although I think pro-lifers can win under a rights-based language, I think fundamentally using the rights language is impoverishing our discussion over what our responsibilities are to children. Abortion is wrong because we have a responsibility to children that they are allowed, we have a responsibility to children to raise them, to make sure that the life we create is protected. We have a responsibility to 2-year-olds to make sure that they learn how to talk and that they learn how to talk in the right way, thus constraining their rights to speech. And we have a responsibility to 6-year-olds to compel them in order to go to school. The rights-based conversation completely ignores that. And it's one of the reasons why I think this whole language of rights is so stupid. But let's go on, because I'm kind of coming to the end of my energy here. So pressing for, well, this is only halfway through. What else is LSB even going to say in this video? There's nothing here.
Is this argument truly consistent? The answer is no, but some will persist in making this argument nonetheless. Let's remove all doubt and assume that a woman who engages in sex and becomes pregnant has done so knowing the risk of pregnancy, that she is responsible for the life that conceives through her activities, even if she does not want that life in her body. Judith has an answer for those concerned with this conundrum.
If the room is stuffy and I therefore open a window to air it and a burglar climbs in, it would be absurd to say, now he can stay. She's given him a right to the use of her house, for she is particularly responsible for his presence there, having voluntarily done what enabled him to get in full knowledge that there are such things as burglars, and that burglars burgle. It would be still more absurd to say this if I had had bars installed outside my windows, precisely to prevent burglars from getting in, and a burglar got in only because of defect in the bars. It remains equally absurd if we imagine it is not a burglar who climbs in, but an innocent person who blunders or falls in. Again, suppose it were like this. People seeds drift about in the air like pollen, and if you open your windows, one may drift in and take root in your carpets or upholstery. You don't want children, so you fix up your windows with fine mesh screens, the very best you can buy. As can happen, however, and on very, very rare occasions does happen, one of the screens is defective, and a seed drifts in and takes root. Does the person plant who now develops have a right to the use of your house? Surely not. Despite the fact that you voluntarily opened your windows, you knowingly kept carpets and upholstered furniture, and you knew that screens were sometimes defective. Someone may argue that you are responsible for its rooting, that it does have a right to your house, because after all, you could have lived out your life with bare floors and furniture, or with sealed windows and doors. But this won't do, for by the same token, anyone can avoid pregnancy due to rape by having a hysterectomy, or anyway by never leaving home without a reliable army.
Oh my god, this is stupider than the first reason. I mean, first of all, like, it treats pregnancy as if sex coincidentally leads to pregnancy, which it obviously doesn't. Sex is the act that creates life. If you create life, if you press a button and make a child, then you have a responsibility to create that child. This is the thing. When did people get the notion? When did people get the idea that sex doesn't create children? Oh yeah, liberals and progressives told them that was the case. They told them that they had no right to expect this to happen. The reason why Judith Jervis Thompson has to create this idiotic example of people seeds is that that world seems so outlandish to us, so outlandish to us that it seems ridiculous to expect that opening a window would create a child. Okay, fine. But how about the act that through our entire evolutionary history, we knew created children? Well, it sounds a lot less insane then, doesn't it? Sex creates children. That every person before the 1960s was told, if you do sex, you're creating a child. Maybe you don't create a child, but that is what sex is for. It's for creating children. That is what the act of sex does. Just like the act of putting all your poker chips on the red column of a roulette table means that you're betting your money on red. It's so basic and so central. Basically, what Judith Jarvis Thompson wants to be is saying that the child is responsible for our own misinformation, for our own attempt to misinform the American people and indeed all Western people as to the direct consequences of sex. We misinformed people, and now because we misinformed them, the responsibility has to lay on the part of children. And once again, like, let's say you opened your door and someone came in. That means you can shoot them if you invited them in. So if you invite someone into your house and they come in, you can't shoot them for trespassing. Period. And you have to, if you invite them in with the knowledge that it will take them 5 minutes to get at the property, you have to allow them the 5 minutes to vacate the property. And having sex is inviting someone in with a necessary understanding that it will take them 9 months to vacate your property. Even under these insane rights-based language that's totally ineffective for dealing with how the state legitimately dishes out life and death on a political scale. It's even insane in that perspective. And of course, we have to imagine this ridiculous baby seat example, so it seems as if the concept of sex creating children is so insane that it's insane. The idea that sex creates children is as insane as the idea that sex is created by seeds that float just through the air. I guess if you've been massively misinformed about how human biology works.
This thought experiment is designed to demonstrate that abortion is not the intentional infliction of death upon one person, but to demonstrate the intentional withdrawing of bodily consent from another. In any other scenario in the world, an individual is allowed to control their own bodily autonomy. One person...
I mean, no, they're not. We ban medical procedures all the time. We've banned certain forms of psychology in the state of California. You don't have bodily autonomy is not some kind of eternal right that everyone has. You can lose it in any number of ways. That's just the fact of being a human.
Is not required to transfuse blood if he does not consent to it. Organ donations are entirely voluntary. Even though the donation of organs and blood transfusion would save lives, we understand that we cannot compel one individual to suppress his own rights to save another.
Okay, does this work with property rights too? Are property rights absolute because charity is nominal? Therefore, then that gets back to the Peter Singer thing, right? If we said that you have a property right, does that mean that, you can't possibly have a property right because that means you'd have to give all your money to children in Africa, the way that Peter Singer thinks you probably should be compelled to. And this is sort of like this ridiculous limit thinking that leads to no good political answers that can ever be practically thinking. You either have to essentially eternalize bodily autonomy rights or completely discard them. Does that mean we have to eternalize and treat as ridiculously extreme the ideas of property to the point that we can no longer take taxes? Well, of course not. It's stupid.
Only arena where this is ever seen as acceptable is abortion. Government law is force.
No, it's not true. Military.
Any and every policy is done at the end of a gun in the name of service to a social contract. So by outlawing abortion, it is telling women that they must go through a pregnancy that they do not wish to go through at the end of a gun.
So, I mean, again, taxation, but this is the autism that gets you taxation is theft on the libertarian side. Like, there needs to be a political theory that does not fall down these autism rabbit holes. I mean, I know that, I don't think that, like, does LSP not believe in property rights? Does then he believe that taxation is theft? Or does he believe that provisionally governed rights have provisions in them? That there are rational limitations to these ideas that exist around core functionality such as war, such as the intentional creation of human life, which is necessarily sex. That's what sex is. It's the intentional creation of human life. And anytime you undergo sex, you are doing that. The pleasure is merely a byproduct.
Of course, this all grants that the true purpose of abortion restriction is to save a life. But often, conservatives lie to themselves about their own motivations and use restrictions as a backdoor way to control the bodies of women. To be true to the spirit of life in a philosophical sense would require one to see that the logical starting point for life is in fact viability and not conception.
Not really. How is that possible? Viability shifts constantly. Viability is not... So that means that technology, like life, begins later the more advanced our technology gets. Viability used to be a lot later than it is right now because the technology we have to sustain life has gotten better. But that makes technology something that can functionally make life... So that means if we ever got an artificial womb, life would begin at conception or implantation because it would then be viable to live outside the womb with new technology. Again, insane. An insane standard that makes absolutely no sense for the beginning of life, descriptively in any way.
Some might argue birth, others argue conception, but these are all equally arbitrary starting points for when life begins, since
well, conception and birth at least are static, as opposed to viability, which is moving.
Life as we understand it is a process and not an event. The sperm and egg are both life. It's a cellular organism with human DNA. The only distinction one could draw is unique genetic code, but I'm no more convinced by this argument than I am any other.
But that also would mean, since we see life as a process, that means that 2-year-olds are not full adults and therefore not full humans. Therefore, we treat them as half a life because they're not fully developed. Again, people who actually, I guess Peter Singer does take his autism seriously. He actually goes that full route. He says that you should be able to kill 2-year-olds. Okay. Yeah, that's the conclusion. That 2-year-olds are sort of half-lives, not full. And then I guess when you get to like 6 or 7, you're like 75% there. I guess you get a discount on the penalty for murdering children. That's the conclusion. necessarily from this idiotic idea.
Identical twins develop from a single fertilized egg, two individuals with the same genetic code. The only difference is environmental. Is one of these twins not a life for not possessing a unique genetic code? Of course not, and nobody would argue this. Imagine that a fertility clinic were on fire and you run into the lobby to help as you can. To your left is a fertilized embryo developing in vitro, and to your right is a living baby no older than 6 months. You only have time to save one. Whichever one you save is guaranteed to survive. If you truly believe that these are both human lives, this should have to be a coin flip. Now let's weight that coin. To your left is 10 fertilized embryos developing in vitro, and to your right is a living baby no older than 6 months. This has now become the trolley experiment. Who do you save and why?
Yeah, but this has become the trolley experiment, and we know what people will pick, don't we? People choose to not push people in front of the trolley to save 6 people. That means murder is okay. No, it's because this concept of rights to life are discussions about responsibilities. You have the responsibility you bear to different people at different stages varies depending on your relationship to it. You have okay, so how about this? You're writing a check, like you're gonna send a check to save children in Africa, but in that very moment, a child is drowning next to you. Do you mail the check or do you save the drowning child? Even though the check to save starving children in Africa could save 1,000. Wow, LSP, I guess if you save the child, you must think that Africans aren't really human, you racist. Wow, oh, wow. Liberal Sandy, alt-right revealed. Oh, confirmed alt-righter, Liberal Sandy Project, doesn't believe Africans are children. Doesn't believe that they're human. No, it's this ridiculous trolley experiment. People fail the trolley experiment, LSP. Did you not realize that? Does that refute our concept of murder?
There is no right or wrong answer here. If you truly believe that life begins at conception, the embryo should be just as valid a choice as the baby. The point of this thought experiment is to make you confront with the rhetoric you have constructed within your own moral framework. Do you truly view an embryo as a human life, and thus it is murder to destroy one, or is this rhetorical flourish simply a self-indulgent play? We need not confront with the scenario itself to see that it's a rhetorical flourish in most instances. Fertilized embryos are actually destroyed all the time. Not in abortions, but in fertilization clinics. Data by the Human Fertilization and Embryology Authority shows that 1.7 million fertilized human embryos have been discarded by fertility clinics since 1991.
And if you're Catholic, you're against that as well, but we're going to ignore consistency when it's
on the list shows that these embryos are life, conceived, and with a unique genetic code. Have 1.7 million murders happened in these fertility clinics? Or is this a rhetorical embellishment? What is the difference between discarding fertilized embryos in a fertility clinic and taking an abortifacient that kills an embryo in the womb? Moving beyond the philosophy of abortion to the socioeconomics of abortion reveal a variety of key facts. Abortion access is correlated with a decrease in crime and decrease in poverty. The women who get abortions do so for a variety of different reasons, ranging from socioeconomics and broken homes to legal impediments and ignorance regarding their own gestational progress.
I mean, it's correlated because of wealth. And I'm not even so sure that's true. Abortion access tends to be worse in rural areas, but the crime rate's way lower there per capita. Are you sure you've researched this properly, LSP? I don't think that's true. Unless you're talking about in terms of time. Are we making like the Stephen Levitt argument where like we aborted away all the criminals type deal, like the eugenics thing? Like, are we going that way? Are we doing the liberal Sandy eugenics? I don't know, man. Yeah, if you want to go down that path.
Subsidized access to birth control is likewise a meaningful way of reducing the number of abortions. Basically, Easy abortion access and easy contraceptive access makes the world a better place. In a 2001 paper published in the Quarterly Journal of Economics, researchers Levitt and Donahue found that legalized abortion has contributed significantly to reductions
I'm
in
not
crime.
doing this.
In the 5 states that allowed abortion earlier than the Supreme Court,
It is the Levitt argument.
that women denied.
Okay, look, I'm getting tired of this. Look, if LSP wants to come on, at this point, I don't think we need to finish the video. LSP, first of all, that Levitt study was incredibly criticized for its numerical methods. But I don't really, and I knew this was going to be the case, and I don't think Levitt's even widely used among liberal or progressive arguments for abortion. The violinist argument, the Judith Jarvis Thompson argument, is certainly used very widely. But I don't think LSP actually believes Levitt. I think he's just throwing Levitt out there. This is why I don't like LSP. He doesn't believe what he says. He just understands that they're arguing against you. And whether he is on their side or not, he'll just throw it out, right? Because he knows it's against you. And his argument, he's not trying to argue for a particular view on human life or a particular view on liberty. He's arguing just to debunk you so that he can be right and he can be seen as being more right. So, I mean, I don't know. LSP, I know I don't think you're a good faith actor, but I did review a video, and it would be, I believe I have a responsibility to let you speak up in this show to defend this idea. So if you want to come on this or another Dis Dance, we'll do it. You just have to be available for it. Okay, so let's finish up this live stream because it's gone on way too long, and I have to get done with my other 4th of July things. Okay, super chats and last chats. So the last super chat I'll read will be posted at 1:30, and then okay, how about 1:32 to leave 5 more minutes, and then we'll close out the stream with other questions just to drain out the chat. Remember, I'm not going to see anything unless you reply me at the distributist, and it highlights on the chat. So let's do this. Okay, so the super chats. Jane Sinner. Okay, well, we already read the Jan Cederberg tweet that the mole bug to the Manichean is caused by the wiggery. Yeah, I agree. For €5, Urbit, thank you for your contribution. Please explain why murder is wrong. I know it mostly, but there is a reason behind that. Just because, or I just know, are not reasons. Okay, well, murder is wrong because, I mean, are you sure you're not addressing this to LSP? Because this is a really obvious answer for Catholics. Murder is wrong because humanity is in the image of God, and we can't unjustly, not for a punishment, destroy the human form because it resembles God. Now, politically, because we have to survive, we conditionally allow for the unjust taking of human life in order to guard the body politic. And this has been recognized historically as being something that we can do in extreme conditional circumstances, such as war. But it is something that's handled very, very cautiously. And murder is always, and it is incumbent upon properly acting Christian men, and to a lesser degree women, to establish a political order which ensures the safety of the body politic and that makes sure that the infringement upon the rights of life and the responsibility of the continuation of the collective is ensured in perpetuity. That's how I'd answer the question in sort of a pre-Enlightenment framework. Excuse me. Pardon me for the cough. So Rod Howard says for $5, the only correct response to the trolley problem is to prevent the philosopher from tying people to the tracks to save his job. Well, yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, if you're going to trolley problem ourselves into saying that abortion has to be illegal, we can also trolley problem ourselves into saying that murder should be legal. Does the Liberal Sanity Project believe that trolley problems say that murder should be illegal, because most people answer yes or no or whatever. Of course not. Which means that it's kind of like the trolley problems indicate that our right-based view of how things should work is fundamentally stupid. Or not stupid. It's useful for certain contexts, but it is, in the language of Stephen Bach's, a model and not what we're really doing. What we're really doing is saying that murder is about guarding a political order that ensures that the human form is always and everywhere respected. It's the respecting of the human form that we care about, and that's because the human form is the image of God. But the human form in proper moral relationship to God is what is trying to be achieved by the political order that bans murder and that establishes a right to life, and that establishes among citizens a responsibility to guard the life that we create when it's in the form of children in or out of the womb. That is what's really going on, or that's closer to what's really going on. Obviously, only God knows what's really going on, and I assume that when humans enter heaven, we'll be shocked at what's really going on. It could be that in the face of, in the eyes of many great saints, that whenever we see an immorality or a sin that's going on and walk by, we are literally crucifying Christ. But that makes me morally terrified to think about. And it should morally terrify me to think about that. But I don't know. I guess we could erect a political system that might more fully realize the fact that every time we commit a sin, we are crucifying Christ. I'd have to see how practical it is. I still, at the end of the day, I'll say this against the people who think that the Christians essentially need to live as a beleaguered minority that never takes political power. I think that it's incumbent upon Christian men, and to a lesser degree Christian women, to bring forward a political order that safeguards the body politic, even though we cannot necessarily put into law the idea that every time we commit a sin, however venial, we are crucifying Christ. Even that's not a practical political reality, I still think it's incumbent upon men to put a practical political reality in play that does confront the practical needs of the collective, even though that necessarily is going to have to fall short of what we owe all humanity. And to a certain degree, I think that unless you're a monk, if you stand idly by and let chaos come forward and destroy people's lives because you can't put a secular political order in play that could practically confront it, because it wouldn't be the perfect thing that would eliminate sin from society, I think that you're committing a sin if you stand idly by and let that happen. And I think, and I don't have the exact saint quote loaded in the gun to go, but this is something that I think is true. I mean, I see someone saying, Julian Peacock, Christianity is at its best when it's persecuted. Sure, if you're being murdered, you are acting out Christianity in a way that me sitting here with a day off answering super chats, and I am not acting Christianity out as well as you are being murdered. But there are some concerns. You can't seek martyrdom as a Christian. You can't. That's a sin. Check the church fathers. You can't seek martyrdom. It is sort of like a instant salvation, but you can't seek it. It's a sin to seek it. Secondly, sitting on your hands talking about martyrdom being or persecution being the ultimate example of Christianity, while chaos erupts around you and destroys the collective you belong to, that's not martyrdom. Talking about how great martyrdom and persecution is not the same thing as necessarily enduring persecution. And seeking persecution in martyrdom is not only not good, it is literally a sin. And in my conception, a mortal sin. Well, actually, adventuredom in terms of seeking martyrdom or persecution for yourself might not be the worst thing, but seeking martyrdom or persecution for your community, for your children, in sort of a Munchausen by proxy sort of way, the way that the progressive Christian heretics are doing day in and day out, is not even nothing like martyrdom or persecution. It's almost the exact opposite of martyrdom or persecution. It's sacrificing others to your own sense of moral self-righteousness. What could be worse than that? I don't know. Again, no one defends this in real conversation. It's just a stupid rhetorical tactic used by people who know they're arguing against Christians so they can shut Christians up and block them from what I see as a necessary political and moral responsibility. But I guess I have to stop myself at the risk of being a little bit too moralistic here. Okay, I see a lot of people saying that LSP isn't so bad. The reason why I think LSP is bad is not because of the videos he made. It's because of my own personal interaction and how he's essentially attempted to shame me for charity, or shame the community I belong to for its. He's attempted to use my community's own charity as a weapon against the community that gave the charity. That's a big line for me. But to talk about charity and goodwill, I want everyone to spend the rest of the 4th of July with their families. I know a lot of us have problems with America and with liberalism, but today on the 4th of July, regardless of our problems ideologically with Jefferson and with the Enlightenment, let's think about the good things they did. Let's think about the notions of ordered liberty that Jefferson wanted to express. The communication of virtue that was necessarily the objective of people like Benjamin Franklin and the other people who signed the Declaration of Independence. The heroism of the American forefathers that fought for principles, and probably more than principles, just fought for their homeland and for their people's independence, to be a people independent of a larger imperial structure that wanted to mold them into its own financial interests. Let's also think about the heroism of the British people who fought for their empire and for their notion of order. Let's remember that the war for independence had heroes on both sides, but that this particular day is given over to the particular heroism of those who believed in ordered liberty, regardless of other flaws in their ideas. And if you're American, celebrate that. So, considering that I'm already over time, I'm going to say thanks everyone for tuning in. This has been a very pleasant live stream, and I hope I haven't gone too much on my high horse. Thank you all for your super chats, and have a wonderful Independence Day, and I'll hopefully do another live stream after I release a few more videos. So have a good 4th of July, and I'll see you all in the comments. God bless.